Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Tamed Hell and Became the Demon King? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Mommy had rules, very simple, easy to follow rules. There were only 3 of them so far, and Izuku was happy to comply if that meant Mommy wouldn't hit him anymore. It was a fool's dream, but Izuku put hope into it anyway. Follow the rules and you might survive. Don't speak, mumble, cry, or whine. Do everything Mommy tells you. Make sure the house is clean, and make her breakfast. Izuku, for years old, knew that these were the rules. He had them memorized and stored away. Mommy liked it when he followed these rules. Izuku didn't mind that Mommy made him follow these rules. He didn't mind when she hit him either. He wasn't allowed to mind. He could only accept it and move on, like when Daddy left them. That day, Mommy had been very mad and she'd slapped him across the face. It was the first time she struck him, and it never stopped after that day. How'd he get that nasty bruise, Inko? Mitsuki asked as the young boy played with Kaken. Inko gave her a confused look before going over to her son. Izuku perked up, hoping Mommy would be nice. She mumbled softly, taking a hold of his face. I'm not sure, I'll have to keep an eye on him. Izuku beamed at her, hoping his mommy was better now. He was wrong. He was so wrong. Kaken handed Izuku an All Might figurine and they played together, Kaken wielding an Endeavor action figure. Izuku liked Kaken because Kaken was nice to him, unlike other kids in preschool. He was 3 at the time, and it was the day that he realized Mommy would pretend to be a nice mommy, and then hit him whenever the company left. Kaken and Izuku played for a while longer before Mommy stood up. Sorry Mitsuki, but I have to clean the house today. It's too bad we couldn't stay longer. Oh, it's fine Inko. Same time next week? Katsuki really loves Izuku. Mitsuki nearly begged the woman, and Inko smiled a smile made of sunshine and razors. Not that Mitsuki noticed the last part. Sure, that shouldn't be a problem, Inko told her, gesturing for Izuku to get up and leave. Izuku pouted and handed Kaken the All Might figure, and Kaken pushed it back into his hand. Izuku arched an eyebrow in confusion. Bring it next time we play, Deku? He yelled gruffly. You better not be late either. Izuku giggled at the blonde, and his mommy grabbed his hand and guided him out of the room. He was buzzing with excitement, nearly jumping out his skin as he gripped that All Might action figure in his small pudgy hand. His mommy walked him all the way to the nearby neighborhood where they lived. She trudged up the stairs and shot a glare at him as she yanked her keys out of her pockets. You don't ever tell Mitsuki about me hitting you, Izuku nodded profusely, gripping the All Might figure just a little tighter. She opened the door to their home silently and opened the basement door. Izuku fought the bile in his throat and the tears threatening to fall. Mommy just gave him that angry look, and he reluctantly made his way down the stairs. It was dark and cold in the basement. It had no lights. He was afraid of the dark. As soon as he reached the end of the stairs, he rushed to his bed desperate to find his tablet. He turned it on and sighed in relief when his face and his surroundings were engulfed in light. This tablet was something he found soon after Daddy left them, and he hid it in his dark room. Sitting in the basement on his bed, Izuku kicked his feet and smiled to himself as he scrolled through the news. It was his birthday tomorrow. That meant Mommy wouldn't hit him, but he wouldn't get cake. She wouldn't congratulate him either, but he could spend the whole day watching an old clip of All Might. It was his birthday present to himself. Every year he'd watch the same video over and over. It was comforting and he absolutely adored All Might. He silently hoped that he'd get a quirk tomorrow, and he hoped it was cool. Nothing could be worse than being quirkless, so he begged any deity or god up in the sky that he got one, no matter how useless it was. How ironic, considering he'd do anything to be quirkless merely days from now. Would Mommy love him if he became a hero and got a cool quirk? Maybe. He grinned at the implications. He could sleep in an actual room. Mommy would kiss him goodnight and make him cake on his birthday. Mommy wouldn't have to hurt him anymore, hopefully. Mommy would act like a mommy from those movies she always watched when she sent Izuku to bed. Izuku grinned, still holding the tablet. He crawled under his covers hastily and tried to turn off his brain. He was almost too excited to sleep, but after watching a newer video of All Might giving a speech about quirks, he finally went to bed. The next morning he opened his eye with a small, well-rested sigh. He blinked the drowsiness out of his eyes and yawned. He rubbed at his eyes and did a double take. What he saw made his limbs lock, and his lips tremble. The monster looming over him had teeth sharper than a sword, and they were longer than his forearm. They dripped with red saliva. It made Izuku sick to his stomach. The black limbs attached to the dark man were too long, and they gripped the ceiling, his bed, the floor. A human spider. Blacker than black. It was nose to nose with him. Terror bubbled up his throat, and he wanted nothing more than to run. But 4-year-old Izuku was frozen to his spot. His throat ached as he fought for air. No matter how much he begged to scream, his mouth didn't move. His throat refused to open. He couldn't even breathe. Everything had come to an abrupt stop. He hated his quirk, he quickly decided. Then the thing began to scream. So loud that Izuku was finally spurred into action. He tried to push the monster away, but his hand went straight through the demon. He stopped short, letting out a relieved sigh as the monster's hand went through him too. It couldn't hurt him. It was just merely there. Upon realizing that it couldn't hurt him, the spider-like man sprung from Izuku's bed, making the 4-year-old squeak in surprise. Izuku watched as the monster tilted its head, its white eyes glaring into his own. He relaxed finally, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding this entire time. The spider-like monster continued to stare at him before Izuku shooed him away. It hissed at him and glared. It stayed put but didn't bother to meet his eyes again. Izuku was just fine with that, as he scrambled in the darkness to change his clothes. The dark was more ominous now, as he grabbed his tablet and it glowed through the darkness. Izuku bit his lip and jumped back with the smallest of yelps. His heart jumped into his throat as he ran back to his bed, his breathing labored. They were everywhere. Demons surrounded him on all sides, and he choked back a sob. A garbled growl echoed through his room, and Izuku gripped his blanket and tablet tightly. No one had told him that quirks could be scary. He wanted them to go away. Izuku bit back a whine. He didn't want this quirk. Who in their right mind would want something like this? Definitely not Izuku. The door to the basement opened. Izuku could see the light leaking down the stairs. Izuku, a stern voice snapped. His mother. Get up here. Izuku didn't want to move. He couldn't even open his mouth to breathe, but he got up anyway. He didn't want to make Mommy mad, and it was a rule. Do what Mommy says. So he did. He ran up the stairs at lightning speed and pressed his lips together. His throat bobbed slightly, and he could feel his hands beginning to shake. His mother's face was one of anger and red-hot viciousness. Do you know what today is? She asked. Well, she didn't ask. She already knew, and she knew he wouldn't answer her. She crossed her arms, her lips curling into a scowl. It's your birthday. Izuku nodded, wringing his hands together. Did you get a quirk? Should he tell her? It wasn't cool or heroic in the least. She would hate it. She'd be angry if he lied though. So he nodded, and she raised an eyebrow. Lips trembling, he said only 3 words. I see monsters. Her hand came down faster than little Izuku could comprehend. Did I say you could speak to me? Her voice was shrill and made him shrink back. He shook his head vigorously and backed up into the nearby wall. Exactly, she mumbled calmly, her hand coming to touch his face. Izuku jumped. You don't have a quirk, she told him sternly. He furrowed his brow, confused. He definitely had one, even if he didn't want it. You don't have a quirk, she repeated. He nodded, if only to appease her. She smiled at him, her hand going to his wrist. But, make Mommy some breakfast, okay? Izuku chewed on the inside of his cheek and grabbed a bowl. He could only make cereal at his age, and Mommy didn't care. He filled her bowl with the cereal and then retrieved the milk from the fridge. He poured a respectable amount in the small bowl. He handed his mommy the bowl and she didn't spare him a single look. You can go back in your room now, she grumbled. Or do whatever, just stay away from me. Izuku didn't have to be told twice. He went into his room, momentarily forgetting about his scary quirk. He retrieved Kaken's All Might figure and sat down in the spare bedroom and played by himself. He smiled gleefully as he swung the toy around back and forth. But it wasn't as fun as playing with Kaken, who could talk enough for the both of them. The young boy puts down his action figure and pouts. He doesn't like it when mommy makes him be alone. He wants to play with Kaken and eat dinner with Auntie Mitsuki. He was truly just a child craving human interaction at this point. He loved his mommy, but she wasn't nice. With a defeated sigh, he takes a hold of his All Might figure again and ventures out of the room. The TV is on, but it's faint, and he can hear his mommy talking on the phone. "Oh, I'm not feeling too well today, Mitsuki. I know it's his birthday, but I literally can't even make it out of bed right now." She goes quiet for a moment, and Izuku dares to venture closer. She barely spares him a glance, her voice high-pitched and cheery as she asks him a question. "Do you want to hang out with Kaken today, Izuku?" He nods vigorously and mommy continues on with her conversation. "You can come on over and pick him up, thanks for this, Mitsuki." 10 minutes later, Kaken is holding an Endeavor action figure with a smile. Mitsuki talked to Inko, her eyes glimmering with pity. Izuku and Kaken are playing right away, and Mitsuki takes them out for ice cream. The small shop is bright and colorful, and inside parents were everywhere. Children trail their parents like little ducklings, and Mitsuki asks both him and Kaken what kind of ice cream they want. Obviously Kaken chooses chocolate, and Izuku picks vanilla. It's a simple and sugary flavor, and Izuku enjoys it every time they go out for ice cream. The three of them take a seat at a table with plush chairs. "So, Izuku," Mitsuki begins, looking uncomfortable. "Is your mommy nice to you?" Izuku takes a lick of his ice cream and ponders the question. He nods feverishly, and Mitsuki lets out a relieved sigh. "That's good," she exclaims, ruffling his curly hair. Izuku gives her a beautiful smile, only for it to falter just slightly. Another demon is hanging around, there are a few more outside. He can see them through the shop's window, and they stop to stare at him but quickly move on. He sighs in relief silently, and Mitsuki gives him a sidelong glance. Her expression is soft, and she wraps him in a half-hug that he burrows himself into with vigor. They move on to another place, the park this time. He and Kaken play tag, and Kaken has tiny explosions coming from his palms. "Your quirk is so cool, Kaken," Izuku exclaims, and Kaken blushes. It makes Izuku grin even wider, and Kaken tackles him, yelling about Izuku being a dumb butt. Not that he minds in the slightest. Some other kids are playing, some in the sandbox to their right, and some playing on the plastic fort with slides. Kaken and Izuku are fine the way they are, playing tag and fighting with their action figures. The two of them are so engrossed in their playing that they don't notice the man wearing a mask. Mitsuki does though, and she positions herself in front of the two children. Everyone is screaming, and she can hear sirens in the distance. Her lips are curled into a frown, and she crosses her arms. The man in the mask has a gun, and Izuku glances up as the man raises the gun in his hands. "Mama!" Kaken starts but never finishes. A shot rings out, but Mitsuki never falls. "You know, Mike, if you would stop yelling in my ear for one goddamn second dash." "I'm sorry, shoulda." Present Mike practically screeches as he watches the single bullet from the gun drop harmlessly onto the ground. Thank God Eraserhead had the sense to wear a bulletproof vest today. Present Mike, the criminal grumbles with the slightest of nods. "Eraserhead?" "Yep." Present Mike yells, "That's us. The Wonder Duo. Don't ever call us that again. The only reason I'm even awake right now is because you bribed me with coffee." "Ah, but Shoyuta. It's Eraserhead." The man with black hair snaps, wrapping the criminal in his white scarf. Izuku's eyes go wide in amazement. Mitsuki lets out a shaky breath of air. The park is empty save for them, and Kaken is tugging on his mother's sleeve. "Who are they, Mama?" he asks, and Present Mike whips around excitedly, nearly brimming with energy. "Why hello there, dear listener," the man exclaims. Kaken looks confused for only a second before Izuku walks over and gawks. Kaken practically matches his expression as Eraserhead and Present Mike enter into another bickering match. Mitsuki grabs both boys by the hand and thanks the heroes profusely. Present Mike waves his hands desperately, while Eraserhead yawns. It's fine really. Present Mike tells her, we lost sight of him. It's our fault he even got that close. It is your fault. If you would have let me wrap him in my capture weapon we wouldn't even be here, Eraserhead pointed out. Mitsuki grins. You two bicker almost as much as those two. She jerks her thumb to the two boys crowding her legs. We should really get going and get this villain detained before he can escape, Eraserhead mumbled, then he pointed at Present Mike. Sorry about him. Hey! Present Mike whined, you're mean. Tell me something I don't know. This might just be the best birthday he's ever had. Especially so when Auntie Mitsuki manages to haggle autographs out of both of them. She tucks the autographs away in her car after the two pro-heroes leave, and they drive home. She doesn't take Izuku to his house yet. She tells him it's because she bought him a cake and she bought him a few gifts he needs to open first. He opens them with unbridled excitement that makes Mitsuki and Masaru coo at the sight. He gets an All Might onesie and an All Might poster. After eating some dinner and munching on some of the cake, Masaru, Mitsuki and Kaken pile in the car to take him home at long last. Mitsuki and Kaken walk him to his house, and Mitsuki knocks on the door. Kaken turns to Izuku who is smiling. Happy birthday, he mutters, gripping an All Might figure. You can keep this, 'cause it's your birthday? He hands Izuku the action figure for good, and Izuku tackles him in a hug. Kaken sputters, finally breaking away when Mommy opens the door, looking tired. Oh Mitsuki, she mumbles, thanks for bringing him home. Mitsuki nods, but Izuku misses the air of suspicion weighing the blonde woman down. Izuku waves goodbye to Kaken and Auntie Mitsuki as the door closes behind him. The house is dark, and the gray colors of the walls only make it seem darker. The floor is cleaner than usual, to the point he can actually see the wood flooring, which means Mommy cleaned. He throws off his shoes at the entrance, slipping on his house slippers. Mommy says nothing. This was a good day for her. She didn't even hit him. Maybe his mommy was really okay. She takes to staring at him as he takes his presents and head for his room. He went downstairs, passing a black figure on the way. His hand barely brushed the demons, but the gasp of shock elicited from his mommy is enough to startle him. Izuku peers up at her through his eyelashes, and she's shaking. What is that? Izuku bites his lip and shuffles his feet. Did she want him to tell her? Or was she just shocked? Her face is deathly pale, and she backs away into the kitchen. Her hand shoots out as if on instinct, and all Izuku can think is, oh no. A knife flies into her hand almost immediately, it glowing a faint green that makes him nauseous beyond belief. Get that thing out of here, she snapped. Take it downstairs with you, and don't bother coming out tomorrow. Izuku's bottom lip quivers, but he yanks on the demon's hand, and it seems to comply to an extent. It gives him a Cheshire grin that makes his blood go cold, but it goes nonetheless. He grips his poster, action figure and onesie tighter. Go, Mommy growls, knife still in hand, her hair falling in messy clumps. Her green eyes pierce his, and he scrambles into the petrifying darkness. His mother was scarier than any quirk and any darkness. He threw his birthday presents onto the concrete floor unceremoniously, only holding the onesie as he grabbed his little tablet. Izuku plays that video for himself, that one where All Might is saving people all the while he has blood dripping down his face. It offers Izuku comfort, as he changes quickly and adorns his new onesie. It's soft and warm. He ignores the white eyes in the darkness, the way their garbling voices itch at him. He ignores their long claws that yank at his blanket. He ignores how ugly they are. Izuku shoves the image of the stumps they all had on their backs where wings were. Supposed to be out of his mind. Despite himself, he wonders what they'd done to have their wings ripped off. Something horrible. Something bad. Something taboo and dark. Izuku is 10 years old when he realizes that his mother hates him more than anything else in the world. It's a sobering realization, but a realization he needed to come to nonetheless. It could be because of his quirk. Or his father leaving her. All he knew was that his mother hated him, and told him he was quirkless repeatedly even though they both knew he wasn't. It was strange, But Izuku figured out it was safer to agree than to refuse it. She'd kicked him in the stomach more times than he could count when he talked about his quirk. So he did the only thing he could think of, and he learned to ignore his quirk entirely and to fear it at the same time. It didn't make much sense to be afraid of something he pretended didn't exist at all. But he'd do anything his mother asked of him, including lying to the world about his quirk. Midoriya Izuku, a boy with a quirk? No. Midoriya was undoubtedly and unequivocally quirkless. His birth certificate said it. His ID said it. Even he said it, albeit only when she made him. No one had any reason to doubt him, and he was grateful for that. The only people who were anywhere near suspicious of him and his mother were the Bakugus. Only because Auntie Mitsuki found it odd that Izuku never ever said a word. Not to his teachers, not to Kaken, though the boy always knew what he was thinking, not to his own mother. Over the years Mitsuki constantly asked him why he never spoke, and Izuku just shrugged. It wasn't like he couldn't read or write. He just didn't like talking. It set him on edge and it made him mother mad. He didn't like it when his mom was angry. She'd go quiet and cold, and her nails would dig into his scalp as she dragged him into the hallway where she'd beat him. It was like his voice was a trigger, and he'd much rather avoid talking altogether. Today though, he'd followed all the rules and she still ended up backhanding him across the face. His cheek throbbed and ached, and he could feel hot tears begin to sting at the back of his eyes. "I told you to clean the kitchen," she screams shrilly, and he finds himself wishing he could go back in the basement even though the thought sent goosebumps down his arms and legs. He definitely didn't remember her telling him to clean the kitchen, but her anger was beginning to bubble over. It would only be a matter of time before she hit him again and handed him a bucket full of harsh chemicals to scrub the floor with. But today he ducked past her and grabbed it himself, his tiny hands shaking as he got to work, and she left him, an ugly frown marring her otherwise beautiful face. The sponge in his hand was dipped into the bucket of bleach, and he didn't even bother to put safety gloves on as he bent down to scrub the perfectly clean floor. The kitchen floor was made of white tiles, and in all honesty, they could go without an in-depth clean with bleach. The sharp smell of bleach assaulted his nose and he resisted the strong urge to rub at his eyes. The smell of the bleach always had a dizzying effect on him, but he pushed through it. His mother was scarier than passing out from the bleach, so he made quick work of cleaning the kitchen and the kitchen counters. He stored the bucket of bleach under the sink and closed the wooden cabinet before moving on to sweeping the floor. Throwing the crumbs of food and chunks of food into the trash, he grabbed a rag and scrubbed at the counters. Some of the food was stuck on the counters pretty good, and his arm burned with all the energy he was using to scrub all of the gunk away. His mother got up from the couch around an hour later, once he was sure the entire kitchen was spotless and clean. She studied the white plain counters and gave the floor a pretty critical look before glaring at him. Izuku swallowed his inevitable yelp, and she moved before he could react. Her hand wrapped around his wrist, squeezing with way more force than necessary. Her eyes flashed with malice and resentment, emotions he was used to by now. Her frown morphed into her signature scowl, and he cowered. He tucked his chin into his chest and avoided her eyes. Her fist cracked against his face. His eyes were squeezed shut and white light sparked behind his eyelids. Izuku clenched his jaw as another blow was aimed for his temple. Pain sliced through him, leaving him swaying on his feet and clutching his head with a slight hiss. He opened his eyes just slightly, becoming nauseous almost as soon as his eyes were open. His vision was blurry, and the ground seemed like it was moving closer and closer. His mother spat something, but he couldn't quite hear it. All he knew was that she left him after that. It was then that he decided to take his leave and head for the Bakugu's home. He promised to go over some homework with him earlier this week, and it would be suspicious if he didn't show up. He went down into his darkened room and navigated it with practiced ease even though he could barely see anything. He grabbed an all-night hoodie from the pile of clothes on the floor, sniffing it to make sure it didn't smell like it hadn't been washed. And it hadn't been, not for a while. He hoped they didn't notice. He bit the inside of his cheek as he changed into sweatpants, his vision swimming, and his chest tightening. He always felt the tears before they came, and every once in a while he couldn't keep them at bay. Today was not that day, as he swallowed them back, taking deep breaths to clear his vision. A ghost of a hand rested on his back, and he shrugged it off. A garble of dark curses soon followed, and Izuku glared over his shoulder. The rough mumbling stopped, but those white eyes stared at him. The hairs on the back of his neck rose, and he could feel himself breaking out into a cold sweat. He needed to leave before the darkness got to him. He could only handle so much before breaking down completely. The demon sighed through its nose, the noise loud and clicking in his ears. He ignored it and trudged back up the stairs quickly. His mother was nowhere in sight, and Izuku silently thanked his lucky stars as he left the house in a hurry. He shoved his hands in his pockets and took the memorized path to the Bakugu's home. The walk was relaxing and entirely a welcome distraction. The sky was open and nearly cloudless. It too warm for his hoodie, but he didn't mind. He liked being warm over being too cold. He walked down the pretty deserted sidewalk, only coming into contact with a minor hero who asked him if saw a cat named Salem. "Hey there! Have you seen this cat?" The small-time hero held out a little flyer with the picture of the cat and gestured toward it. He shook his head silently, and the hero looked dejected and upset. "Oh, sorry for bothering you." He really wished he could help, but he wasn't really good at finding cats. They avoided him at all costs, and when they got too close to him they lashed out. He still had a few healing scratches from a week ago where a cat attacked him out of nowhere while he was walking to school. It was probably because of his stalkers who followed him day and night. The demons who screamed at him and ripped off their skin to scare him as a kid. They still scared him, but they couldn't touch him, so they were relatively harmless. Most of them yelled unintelligible things at him and gave him obscene gestures. Sometimes, though rarely, they repeated one phrase. "God does not shine upon you." He could attest to that, honestly. Izuku saw out of the corner of his eye a particularly large demon, but he shoved away all traitorous thoughts about his quirk. He was quirkless. He was quirkless. Mother was always right. Everything she says goes, so if she says he's quirkless, then he's FING quirkless. He didn't even spare those dark figures a single glance as he crossed the street. One of them brushed against his shoulder, but he pretended not to notice. It was easier to stare at the cracks in the pavement and ignore them than to acknowledge them. It would make his mother angry, and it egged them on. Even just a drop of blood would send them into a frenzy. He didn't want to fuel the already out-of-control fire. No thanks. He walked down the street for a little while longer before coming upon the small house. It was bigger than what they needed, but Izuku was over there a lot, so it made sense as to why they'd saved the extra room for him. He rang the doorbell and shuffled his feet eagerly. He loved hanging out with Kaken and Auntie Mitsuki. She always fed him a lot of food and gave him random presents. Sometimes he caught her staring at him with worried eyes. She was wary for him, and rightfully so. Izuku waited patiently for Kaken to open the door and startled slightly when he immediately screeched when the door swung open. "You're late, Deku!" He growled angrily, even though it didn't match his relaxed stance and soft eyes. He smiled thinly, and Kaken stepped aside to let him inside. Izuku instantly feels welcome as soon as he takes in the carpeted floor that's a dull beige color. The walls are a soft gray that complements the carpet pretty well. "Deku's here, hag. You got him some snacks, right?" He didn't deserve these people, he quickly decided, as Kaken went into the kitchen and handed him a nutrition bar. "You look skinny as F-, stupid Deku," the boy spat. "You gotta eat more?" Izuku nodded. "And you gotta start talking more too. How are you gonna be a hero if you can't talk to people?" Kaken's voice was rough and rude, but his words were always gentle beneath all of that. It was almost like he had a soft spot for Izuku, and it made the shorter boy grin. "What you grinnin' 'bout, DMN nerd?" Izuku shrugged, and downed the nutrition bar in record time, dragging Kaken into his room. "Fucking fine. Let's fucking study. Din why are so impatient?" Kaken growled, closing the door behind them. Izuku makes a beeline for Kaken's backpack and grabs the many textbooks resting inside. He drops them loudly on his desk, Kaken curses, and Izuku flashes his winning smile. He has a pad of sticky notes at the ready, and he motions to the open textbook and the worksheet that accompanies it. Kaken rolls his eyes. "I hate that you're so smart." They settle into a simple routine. He watches Kaken work through the packet, slapping a sticky note down when he gets it wrong. The stick note is filled with a long-winded explanation of the question and exactly where he went wrong. Sometimes I think you have a FNG analysis quirk, Kaken says with a deep sigh when Izuku slams another sticky note onto the packet. Izuku gives him a smile that looks like the cat got the canary. You smug little Bisudi, he exclaims, launching himself from his chair, and Izuku lets out a yelp as the taller boy crashes into him. Kaken is on top of him, and Izuku pouts silently when Kaken snickers at him. No one's better at combat than me. Kaken's expression is self-assured, and it makes Izuku roll his eyes. Combat genius, he wrote quickly. He smacks the sticky note on his head, and Kaken snatches it off, rolling away so Izuku can sit up. He lets out a snort and helps the green-haired boy up. This is always when his mother bursts in, yelling about watching a movie or a TV show together. Right on time, Auntie Mitsuki kicks the door open. She's dramatic and smiles at Izuku warmly. Do you want to watch a Marvel movie with me? She asks as Kaken puts his now-finished homework away. Katsuki, go make your mom so fucking popcorn. How about it, Izuku? He nods eagerly, and his eyes must be shining his excitement and contentment for once because Mitsuki looks really, really happy. Alright y'all, let's go. They all move from Kaken's room into the living room where Masaru is setting up the surround sound. He sticks the disc into the DVD player, and Kaken is in the kitchen making popcorn. Izuku goes to help him, grabbing a big plastic bowl with an All Might decal on it. 3 minutes later the popcorn is ready, and Kaken pours it into the bowl mumbling about how he could have used his explosions to make the popcorn faster. That boy is ridiculous sometimes. Izuku darts out of the kitchen popcorn in hand and Kaken growls when he ducks away from him. Sit down, problem children, Mitsuki mumbles as Masaru presses play. The two of them take up one side of the couch, and Mitsuki and Masaru are on the other side. The movie starts pretty quickly and Izuku deduces that it's a Thor movie as soon as Loki walks into the screen. Thor and Loki are some of his favorite Marvel characters, and Auntie Mitsuki knows that. She's honestly like an angel who keeps him from starving and becoming socially inept. Honestly, he'd be dead without her. He hopes he never loses her, as Kaken grumbles about Loki being an absolute butt. It reminds Izuku of a certain blonde. I am not like Loki, you shitty nerd. Sometimes I wonder how you can read his mind like that, Masaru says as the movie continues on. Soulmates, I wonder? Kaken sputters, a mad blush creeping onto his cheeks. Izuku elbows him, glaring but blushing too. Masaru and Mitsuki bark out bouts of laughter at the look on their faces and Kaken loses his mind. Shut the F up, ya old hags, he yells, grabbing a hold of the popcorn and monopolizing it. Izuku can see Mitsuki holding back a laugh, and his shoulders begin to shake. He holds his hand over his mouth, fighting the laugh bubbling up in his chest. Kaken gapes, but Izuku lets out a breathy wheeze, and Mitsuki is on the floor cackling. Even fucking Izuku is laughing. After the endless laughter subsides and Izuku can catch his breath, they all direct their attention back to the TV. The movie ends too soon for Izuku personally, but Mitsuki lets him stay for dinner. Masaru fills his plate full of vegetables and rice, accompanied by some chicken. He doesn't need to be told twice, as he picks up his chopsticks and downs the whole plate in less than a minute. Mitsuki gives him a fond look, and then her eyes widen just slightly. Oh, I have something for you. Izuku arches up an eyebrow, and she goes into her office. She quickly emerges with an older phone model, and suddenly she shoves it into his hands. It's older, but not by much, it's her old phone. He turns to her and Masaru, giving them a confused glance. It's for emergencies. It already has our numbers in it, including Katsuki's. You don't have to pay for it either, I'll take care of it. He started to shake his head incredulously. No, it's okay, honey. You need a phone in this day and age, and I don't mind paying for it as long as you use it. Izuku knows his eyes are glistening with tears, and he tries to push them back. Mitsuki engulfs him in a hug, handing him a charger for the new phone. Call me if you need me, yeah? He nods mutely into her collarbone and she releases him. Now, why don't I send you home before it gets too dark? Katsuki and I could walk you. Izuku shakes his head, pointing to his phone with a smirk. He'll be fine, and there are always plenty of heroes patrolling in the afternoon along the populated streets. Besides, what was the worst that could happen? He runs into a pro hero and gets their autograph? Wow, how scary. Mitsuki ruffles his hair with a grin. Alright, get going before it gets too dark. Send me a text when you get home. I don't want to be worrying about you all night, young man. Izuku gives her a curt nod and leaves. The sky is turning orange and red, and Izuku can't help but be a little distracted. It's warm, the sky is beautiful, and he's calm. No one is actively trying to kick his butt, and he doesn't have to clean anything or even go home yet. He's so distracted that he walks right into a stranger, their shoulders knock together. Suddenly he's in a chokehold, his world whirling as he got his feet under him. Izuku's breath is already ragged, and the arm around his throat tightens. Be very quiet, boy, a tall burly man says, holding out a knife for him to see. It glints gold thanks to the sunset. Izuku nods quickly, air puffing out of him in short panicked breaths. Good. Izuku grips the man's arm, clawing for air. His throat aches, and it spreads to the rest of him. He's pulled into the nearest alleyway, and his vision blurs drastically as if he's underwater. He lets out a choking noise and digs his nails into the man's muscular arm. It's a futile fight, but he notices a dark figure watching with white eyes. The demon locks eyes with him, and he gasps slightly. The demon does nothing but place a hand over Izuku's, and the boy watches that hand, pleading silently. His assailant jerks his arm away from him, hissing. Izuku whips around, only taking 2 seconds to see what happened. There was a burn in the shape of Izuku's hand, and he was cradling his arm with a murderous glare. He failed to notice the vigilante waiting to swoop in and decapitate his attacker. The vigilante was wearing a red scarf and held a katana in one hand. Izuku is running before he notices the world whipping past him. He doesn't dare look behind him or stop running until he's retrieving a key from his pocket. He jams it into the lock and unlocks the door, letting it click softly behind him. His throat throbs, and he lets himself gather his thoughts and catch his breath. That demon helped him, and Izuku had no idea why. The house is dark, and that sudden thought hits him like a train. It's dark. He can see because of the light filtering through the windows, but it's still dark. Dark enough to set him on edge and make his skin prickle. It's not like the kind of terror he feels when he's locked in his room, but it's very similar. It's almost enough for him to turn on the living room light, but he couldn't. It might wake up his mother. And a forcefully awoken Inko is an Inko he'd rather stay far, far away from. Reluctantly, he goes down into the pitch-black darkness that is his room, and he can already feel the fear building up in his chest. It constricts him, and he feels his eyes burn. The only thing he can hear is his own labored breathing. As soon as he leaves the stairs, he turns on the All Might-themed nightlight near his bed frantically. He has another one on the other side of his bed, and he turns that one on too. The room is very dimly lit now, but it helps him immensely nonetheless. He sits on his bed, tucked in the corner, watching the whole room from his angle. He grips his single pillow tightly, and his eyes never leave the dark staircase. White eyes stare back at him. He squeezes his eyes shut, shuddering and hyperventilating. He hates the dark. He hates it, he hates it, he hates it. The night lights make it bearable, but he'd rather be in a room filled with light. He grabs his tablet and turns it on. His shoulders slumped as soon as he upped the brightness. He didn't mind that his eyes stung. It was so much better than the darkness. He'd rather die than be trapped somewhere in the dark. It was such a silly but debilitating fear. Izuku held his pillow tighter in his arms, before remembering that he promised to text Auntie Mitsuki once he was home. He got his phone out of pocket and turned it on. He manages to find Auntie Mitsuki's number pretty quickly. Izuku, I forgot to message you when I got home. I'm still alive. Auntie, good kid. I was starting to get a little worried. Izuku, sorry Auntie. Auntie, oh it's okay kiddo, just don't forget next time. Katsuki wanted me to ask you if you know what his English essay was about. He put it off until the last second, typical. Izuku, I think it was an essay about quirk theory. He's supposed to choose a topic. Tell him to pick how quirks can affect personalities. The essay is argumentative and honestly he argues about it with me too much. Might as well write an essay on it. Auntie, thanks honey. I'll be sure to show him your text. Izuku, make sure he puts his name on it too, he always forgets. Izuku waited for her reply, and after a while, he realized he probably wouldn't get one for an hour or two while she helped Kaken with his essay. Talking to Auntie Mitsuki always had a calming effect on him, but the second he looked up from his phone that semblance of calm was shattered. A demon with long claws stood nose to nose with him. He yelped and scrambled backward, bumping into the headboard at the back of his bed. The demon tilted its head to the side, but didn't make any moves towards him. Heart hammering in his chest, Izuku didn't sleep for a long time that night. He almost never slept in that dungeon of a room. He hates this room almost as much as he hates the dark, hates his quirk, and hates his mother. And that's saying something. It's one thing to learn that mothers aren't supposed to hit you, but it's another to learn that your mother has let a strange man stay with them. It's a shock, Izuku being the tender age of 12 and mute nearly his entire life when a man named Hisashi comes home with his mother. He doesn't question it of course, as he continues to get ready for the school day. He's gotten used to wearing a middle school uniform, and he's used to his mother's cursing and swift deliverance of pain. He doesn't feel so hopeless as he should, not yet. Izuku still has Auntie Mitsuki to lean on and Kaken always keeps the bullies at bay. He buttons up his uniform and winces when his fingers brush against his bruised collarbone. The blotch of bruising is a deep purple that has yet to begin healing. He hisses between his teeth before trudging up the stairs with his bright yellow backpack. That's when he comes face to face with Hisashi, and the man looks gentle. So different from Izuku's mother, who didn't bother to hide her malice toward him. Hisashi's hair is basically a copycat of Izuku's hair, but black. His eyes are a deep brown that almost looks black. He gives Izuku a slight smile. Izuku doesn't return it, not with his mother standing a little way off. It almost feels like a bucket of ice has been poured down his shirt. He can feel it in his bones. This man is weird, and this man is Hisashi Midoriya. His smile is off-kilter and his eyes are devoid of anything, and Izuku doesn't trust it. He shoulders his way past the man, and Hisashi watches him leave the house with sharp eyes. He can still feel them as soon as the door shuts behind him, and he tries to shake it off. It doesn't work as well as he'd hoped, but his thoughts melted away as soon as he left his dilapidated house and stepped onto the cracked concrete sidewalk. There, adorning his own uniform was Kaken. A black figure was wrapped around Kaken. Its long arms wrapped around Kaken's throat, holding itself up. The demon's legs were hooked around the blonde boy's middle. Kaken was possessed since they were 11. At first, he was worried sick about the boy, but the only effect the demon seemed to have on him was making him more irritable. Maybe Kaken was resistant. He was meaner than he used to be, and he was way more cocky than he'd been originally when they were younger. Sometimes the demon bared its fangs at Izuku and Kaken snapped at him, but it was a rare occurrence. Instantaneously, Kaken was talking, waving his hands around. "Yo Deku, you know how we were talking about going to Yui together?" Izuku nods, feeling a bit apprehensive. Kaken tried to give him a reassuring smile, but it ended up being a smirk. "So, I was thinking that I should apply for the heroics department, and you could for general ed. You could be the smart one, and I could be the one that puts those crazy plans of yours into action. How does that sound?" He nodded ecstatically, his smile going wide. He barely noticed the dusting of pink on Kaken's cheeks. "You like that idea? Good, we can be a wonder duo." Now that was something Izuku could get behind. Kaken went on a whole tangent about it too, as they walked to school. The cherry blossoms were in full swing at this point. They caught in Kaken's hair and Izuku stared at the petals absently as Kaken talked and talked. "We should probably have hero names too. What about Deku and Kaken?" Izuku shot him a thumbs up, and Kaken smiled at him, that soft smile that made Izuku's insides go tingly and warm. Before Kaken can notice the blush on Izuku's cheeks, they arrive at the shitty school they call Aldra Junior High. Not only is the school shoddy and run down, it's also filled to the brim with shitty teachers and even shittier students who didn't know when to keep their mouths shut. In the end, Kaken always got them to stop talking, either through threats or a beatdown they weren't going to forget for a while. It was comforting to know that Kaken would be there with him all day. It was a relief to have a legitimate excuse to stay away from his mom, too. Kaken goes near silent as they enter the building. The two of them shoulder their way through the crowds of bodies that clog up the hallways. Izuku was never a fan of people he didn't know touching him, and this whole situation made it worse. Luckily, before he could panic, he and Kaken managed to make it through. Taking a deep breath, Izuku followed Kaken down the next hallway, dodging bodies and dodging teachers who happened to be in the way. It was almost a dance of sorts, he and Kaken darting out of the way. Sometimes Kaken would yank him one way or another to avoid someone or a wall in some cases. Sometimes it was Izuku pulling him out of the way with an annoyed sigh. "Demon, this school's F&G packed," Kaken grumbled. "It shouldn't take this long to get to F&G class." Izuku nodded in agreement, gripping the strap of his backpack tightly. They take their seats all the way in the back, and Kaken sends him a text. Izuku's phone buzzes in his pocket, and he shoots Kaken an exasperated look. They were literally sitting next to each other. "Kaken, so how are you?" "Deku, you're literally sitting next to me, why are we texting?" "Kaken, because someone decided to be difficult and never talk." "Kaken, seriously though, are you okay? There's a bruise on your eyebrow." "Deku, it's fine, I just hit my head." "Kaken, oh. Deku, what?" "Kaken, nothing. Did you eat anything before school?" "Deku, I can barely wake up this early, and you have the gall to ask me if I ate?" The answer is obvious. "Kaken, you're a dumb butt." "Deku, tell me something I don't know." Kaken clicks his tongue loudly and Izuku looks up from his phone. The blonde boy is holding out a few pieces of wedged apple for him, and he takes it with a smile. Their class begins as he takes his apple wedges and eats as quietly as he can manage. If he's chewing loudly and being annoying, no one voices it. No one even spares him a single look. Maybe it's because Kaken is emitting a no-nonsense aura, but Izuku isn't paying enough attention to his friend to notice. He's diligently taking notes for the both of them and watching a demon out of the corner of his eye. He tries his best to ignore his quirk altogether, and sometimes he manages to. Other times they captivate him, just like now. The dark figure is thin and taller than what should have been humanly possible. It was a bit of a mess, trying to watch the teacher while that thing placed its hands on the chalkboard. Izuku felt his muscles tense and resisted the strong urge to cover his ears immediately. The claws whispered against the board at first, but suddenly they were raked across the board. His ears stung, and he vaguely felt his teeth dig into his tongue as the screeching reached its lethally annoying crescendo. He could feel himself beginning to grind his teeth together, but he pushed past the annoyance and sudden anger. He quickly caught up on his notes and snuck a glare at the demon who decided to torment him today. The demon's white eyes narrowed, and he swore that the monster pouted at him. His eyes had gone wide for only a second, as the demon left the room without so much as a word. Izuku stared at the door awestruck for a few seconds before trying to focus once again. It was kind of difficult, considering a demon pouted at him. Usually they flipped him off or cussed him out. They hung around him and chanted dark things as they walked with him. Never have they ever pouted at him or helped him. Besides that one time, he almost got killed by a criminal in an alleyway. That had been something to behold as well. It was kind of scary to see them listening to him too. That was new. His quirk was getting stronger, and he had no idea why or how. He wanted nothing more than to stop it or make it disappear altogether. Honestly, making it go away forever sounded pretty appealing. He had no idea how to go about it, but he'd figure it out eventually. Izuku had heard some wild rumors about villains selling quirk suppressors for a hefty price. Maybe he could save some money and get one? Who FNG knew, but having something rather than nothing was preferable. He was pulled out of his thoughts when someone kicked his desk. He startled, nearly letting out a yelp when he made eye contact with Kaken. "Come on, nerd. Class is over, let's go to lunch." Did 3 hours pass by so fast? He must have been so engrossed in his own thoughts and taking notes that he didn't pay attention to the time. He scrambled up from his desk, hurried to catch up to the blonde who went on ahead. The lunchroom was large, and so was the FING line. Kaken went to secure a table for just the two of them, his mother's homemade bento in hand. Izuku checked his phone for any recent hero activity. Despite his circumstances with his mother, he hadn't forgotten all of his hobbies. Especially analyzing heroes and picking them apart by just knowing their quirks. He was still fascinated by them, and he still adored them, even if they failed to notice a suffering teenager right before their very eyes. Well, Izuku didn't make it very obvious though, did he? Finally, the lunch line went forward a bit, and Izuku stared at the rapidly filling round white tables seemingly placed at random. He wasn't hungry, and he really didn't need food right now, but Kaken would kick his butt if he came to their usual table without any food on his plate. Soon enough, Izuku was filling his plate with food and leaving the line to sit down. He let out a tiny sigh, eyes scanning every table before he spotted the spiky-haired blonde. Thank God Kaken was hard to miss because he didn't want to spend all day looking for him. It would be embarrassing and annoying. He sat down quickly, with a stifled yawn. "Did you even sleep last night, Deku?" He gave Kaken a shrug and pulled his wooden chopsticks apart to begin eating. Kaken merely opened his lunch from his mother and slid his phone over for Izuku to look at. It was a newly published article in New and Upcoming Heroes. Kaken really knew how to get Izuku's attention, huh? "I'm betting Kamui Woods is gonna be big," he grumbled through his food as Izuku scanned the article like a rabid animal. Izuku shrugged. "What, you think MT Lady will beat him?" He gave a slight shake of his head before grabbing his phone. They both knew that if Izuku wanted, he and Kaken could study JSL and communicate that way. Honestly, he didn't want to make Kaken learn it, so he just never bothered with it. Maybe he should have. That would have been wise, but Kaken always spoke enough for him, and could practically read Izuku's mind. It was kind of unnerving almost, how easily Kaken could read him like an open book. He didn't need JSL to communicate if he had Kaken. But he wasn't that naive. He knew if he wanted to become something he'd have to speak. He just wasn't sure how, or if he could. Or maybe he could get off his butt and bother with some JSL. Auntie Mitsuki would probably be very interested in helping him learn it, and she'd even offered to help him learn a few times. So maybe he could try that out. Anyway, he shakes his head at Kaken. He slowly types out his response in his phone as he eats, and Kaken's eyes widen slightly. "I give it a month before they're dating. You think they'll get together?" he exclaims incredulously, giving Izuku a shocked look. Izuku nods vigorously, and Kaken leans back in his seat with a smirk. "How could you possibly know that?" He shrugs and Kaken shakes his head. They continue in companionable silence as they eat, with Kaken sliding his phone over for Izuku to look at. Most of them are about All Might's good deeds today, like how the man stopped a hostage situation before it could escalate. All Might was truly a good hero, through and through. And the world's #1 hero. Didn't have time for small cases of child abuse. That was fine for Izuku. It could be worse, he guessed. He could be homeless or dead. Or maybe that was preferable. Kaken had to serve detention for his harsh behavior towards other students during school. He'd been standing up for Izuku, so he felt bad and wanted to stay with him, but Kaken told him to go home. So he did, by himself for the first time in a long time. His friend always wanted to make sure he got home safely because he was mute, and people would take advantage of that. Or so Kaken said. Izuku had yet to meet someone who even looked in his direction. He was ordinary and plain-looking. No one even bothered to spare him a glance unless Kaken was slinging an arm around his shoulders. It was a blessing honestly because he hated talking to people. He walked through an underpass, phone in hand as he texted Kaken. He wanted to come over to his house tonight to hang out, and Izuku needed to figure out a way to deter him. Izuku was coming up with an excuse. Something along the lines of needing to finish an art project. It was a valid excuse because when he wasn't analyzing heroes and avoiding his mother, he was drawing. That was when he heard it. A wet sound coming from behind him. Izuku stopped in his tracks, turning slowly. The underpass is dark, and the slime figure looks disgusting in the dim lighting. And might he say, terrifying? A cocky grin, all teeth, is displayed on the villain's face. Izuku grimaced, taking a retreating step back. "Don't run away, kiddo." It's like there's gravel in his throat, the way his voice sounds. Goosebumps blossom along his arms and legs, like ice. He isn't stupid, and he doesn't waste time hesitating. Izuku has to move if he wants to live. He hears his shoes slamming against the pavement before he registers that he's running. Izuku passes a few dark figures who watch him with fascination, but he ignores them. It's sad really, how close he was to the street where tons of people walked. How close he was to escaping before he was grabbed, and slime entered every airway. His vision blurred almost instantly with tears. It was a strange sensation to suddenly stop breathing because slime was pushing its way into his lungs and stomach, down his throat and nose, burning and making him jij. He couldn't even close his mouth, and his jaw began to ache and add to the overall pain of everything. Every moment of pain in his entire life couldn't hold a candle to the pain he was experiencing right now. And the despair that coiled in his gut, and the sudden rush of thoughts that screamed at him, louder than the alarmed screams from his demonic entourage. This was the first time he'd ever had a thought such as this one. One so desperate and simple, primal and uncontrollable. A single thought. I don't want to die here. But Izuku Midoriya was cursed. His hands twitched, and his entire chest and face positively ached and screamed at him for air. Even just a second of it. Anything. Anything. I don't want to die here. Izuku didn't beg to be rescued. He knew what he was, and what he deserved even if his thoughts betrayed that. Angels didn't save demons, they ripped them apart starting with their halos and wings. Until they burned. Until nothing but stumps and blood remained, their tortured screams only heard by a single boy. Izuku, who was no better than them. He was tainted and dark. He didn't deserve the gentle words and touches that heroes handed out like free candy. He wasn't a potential hero worthy of praise. Izuku was an abomination, yet he wanted to live. He was so engrossed with his thoughts and struggling that he didn't see the flash of red. He didn't see the blonde hair of a hero he used to admire with almost a religious adoration. But suddenly he was falling and there was air in his lungs. The second his hands skid on the pavement he vomited. Sludge fell in disgusting heaps out of his throat, and Izuku scrunched up his nose. He looked over the two heroes who saved him. All Might and Eraserhead stood a little way off. He gaped at them, his breath coming in short breaths. A man where the sludge villain used to stand stood in its place. Looking terrified. All Might, Eraserhead dash. The voices sounded muffled to Izuku, and he noticed how Eraserhead left quickly as soon as he made eye contact with All Might. He knew that the number one hero could take care of it. Izuku took one look at the distracted number one hero, and the retreating underground hero. And then he left, scrambling to grab his bag. They hadn't noticed him. He blended into the crowd nearby and dusted off his school uniform. Dark green smears were all over it, but that was fine. He had all weekend to clean it. He could sneak in some laundry at some point if he was lucky. Then he remembered something very important. Hisashi was home. He gripped the strap of his backpack tighter at the sudden reminder. Izuku stopped before the door to his mother's small house. The paint was faded and cracked in some places. The house key sat heavily in his pocket, and for a moment he debated actually going inside. It was silent inside as far as he could tell, and it made him grind his teeth together. Izuku reached into his pocket and quickly throws caution out the window. His mother would be furious if he didn't come home. There was no getting around it. He opened the door with a creak, and all of the lights were on. Strange. He took a cautious step forward. The floor squeaked under his weight, and he jumped nearly a foot in the air. Izuku made a beeline for the basement door, steps hurried and his lips pressed into a thin line. Anxiety bubbled in his chest, similar to the sensation of being strangled like earlier when the sludge villain assaulted him. Someone cleared their throat behind him. It was obviously not his mother because it was deep, too deep and masculine. His hand froze around the doorknob. Izuku didn't move. Not even when footsteps sounded behind him, heavy yet quiet thanks to the carpeted floor. "My boy, I was wondering when you'd get home." Izuku chewed on his lip and glanced over his shoulder. "Turn around, Izuku." It was like someone poured a bucket of cold water down his shirt. His mother had never called him that. No one called him that except for Auntie Mitsuki. And this man's tone was cold and devoid of emotion. Izuku carefully detached his hand from the doorknob and turned to face the man who he'd inherited his curly hair from. His freckles. It was like looking in a mirror. A scary, distorted one. He gulped, ducking his head. He could barely see the man through his bangs and eyelashes. But he could never miss that smile that pulled at his lips. His hands started shaking immediately, malice radiated off of that man, his teeth gleaming like fangs. Everything about Hisashi made Izuku want to stay far away from him. Preferably light years away, please and thank you. But no, he only had a wooden door with the lock on the outside. Suddenly he had a gut feeling that his room wasn't safe. Well, scratch that. His room was a prison cell, but now he knew it was a cell that Hisashi planned on invading. It was bad enough that it was shrouded in perpetual darkness, but now Hisashi prowled. A cold, sick feeling coiled in his gut. It hit him like a punch to the stomach, fast, sharp, and unexpected. Hisashi was strange, he had that air about him. The stray demon who managed to follow him cowered in the corner next to him. Its back was to them, its form a solid black. Where wings should be, rested stumps and scars that were a slightly lighter color of black. Izuku's gaze didn't linger, he was too focused on the man in front of him. Asking him a question he'd never answer. Only because he couldn't. He would never be able to. What were you doing? School let out a little while ago, Hisashi grumbled, his arms crossed. Aren't you going to answer your father? The silence that follows is deafening, and Hisashi takes a step towards him, and of course, Izuku takes a cautious step backward in response. His fingertips brush against the wood of the basement door. It sends cold chills through him at the thought of that dark room. His muscles lock in place as Hisashi places one hand on his shoulder. The wave of pain hits him like a freight train, and Izuku is frozen in place. He's on fire, he's burning. This is hell, pain bubbling and overflowing beneath his skin. His teeth snap together, and he doesn't cry out. He can't. His skin screams at him, and his bones jostle just under his skin and muscle. His vision explodes, and everything goes white-hot for a single moment. In that single second, everything distorts. Everything is too sharp, everything is too clear. He can see those godforsaken wings fanned out behind Hisashi. He saw the cowering demon flicker and disappear. He's hallucinating from the pain. That's the only explanation. The basement door he's leaning against shakes, and Izuku lets out a growl of pain. His hands shake, and his knees keeping knocking together as Hisashi's grip only tightens. A deep, scratchy voice whispers faintly. A single word that has Izuku reeling. God. The pain escalates, and Izuku is barely aware of falling to the floor in a big heap. Barely aware of the words Hisashi is spouting. That's my quirk. His quirk. All of this was his quirk? Izuku carefully lifts his head only slightly. The world tilts, and Izuku groans. One side can cause pain, and the other can cause panic. You should be a very careful boy, Izuku. Izuku finally manages to get his feet under him, the hand finally pulled away from him. Relief rushed to him in euphoric waves. He uses the basement door as support, watching Hisashi carefully. Break any of your mother's rules, and I'll make sure you pay the price, got it? Izuku blinks the vague pain away and nods eagerly. Hisashi grins. I think I like you, my boy. I like my victims better if they're quiet and complacent, like you. Hisashi's calloused hands grab a handful of his hair, his picky lifted up and away from him. Izuku flinches back, his breath labored with terror. Izuku grinds his teeth together and ducks his head. Hisashi bares his teeth at him, his next words whispered into his ear. Go in your room and don't come out. Izuku's hand is already around that cold doorknob, and by the time Hisashi walks away he's already opening the door. The darkness swallows him too easily. Izuku squeaks in surprise when the door slams closed on its own. All light is extinguished, and Izuku can feel that rising panic and worry. He hurried down the rickety set of wooden stairs that were never carpeted. Once down into his room, the quiet settles like a thick blanket. He chews on his lip, listening for anything. The floor is cold beneath his feet, and his eyes dart around the empty black. A pair of white eyes blink before him. Heavy footsteps make their way closer to him. He can't see anything, but he sure as hell can feel it. The ice encircles his wrist, so cold it burns against his skin. A hand wraps around his wrist, and the creature rambles loudly incoherently. Izuku tears his arm away and scrambles backward until his shins slam into his bed. The footsteps begin anew. Izuku shoves his hand through the demon before him, and usually where his hand would phase through, it felt like he plunged his hand in ice and fire. He yanked his hand back with a gasp of shock and pain. The demon's advance halted and it grumbled again. Poison! Izuku scrambles beneath his bed covers and hides. The rambles continue loudly, and he can feel the demon's claws scratching gently at the blanket. Izuku curls into a ball, ignoring how that thing's voice sets him on edge. He's quirkless. He's quirkless. That isn't a demon trying to talk to him. Poison! In his pocket, his phone vibrates, and he extracts his hands from his face to take it out. It's a text from Auntie Mitsuki, and Izuku answers her. Quickly. Auntie Mitsuki, Katsuki wants to hang out with you tomorrow. Are you free? Izuku, yeah, but why wouldn't he text me himself? Auntie Mitsuki, I grounded him. He refused to eat dinner until I nearly shoved it down his demon throat. Izuku, he's so dramatic. Auntie Mitsuki, yeah. He said he was worried about something, and then wouldn't shut up about wanting to hang out with you tomorrow. Izuku, tell him I'll meet him at the park. I'll text him when. Auntie Mitsuki, okay. Have a good night, sweetie. His room was silent now, not even an inkling that there was something else in here with him. He lets out a sigh of relief and uncovers himself from the blanket. His room is dark as usual, but there's an aching difference. There aren't any white eyes staring at him from the corners. There are no gleaming teeth or gritty grumbling. It's strange, but he takes in stride, emitting relief and minor anxiety. Izuku clutches his blanket, the darkness burning at his eyes. Even with the absence of those things, this room was still a cell. He could definitely leave at any given moment, but the thought of the repercussions that would follow kept him in his bed. His mother and father would lock him down here forever. And he couldn't let that happen under any circumstances. So he sat in this endless inky dark and stayed put. He reached for his water bottle on the floor next to his bed and drank a few gulps. He always got dehydrated after painful experiences like the one he just had with Hisashi. There were sure to be more, so he should probably think about keeping a few bottles down here at a time. Just in case they decided he wasn't worth the effort anymore, or if Hisashi beat him again. Izuku closed his eyes but didn't sleep for a long time. Even the silence was loud and unbearable in this room. It was when he turned 14 that he realized just how trapped he really was in this house and in this life. Izuku finally came to the realization that things were worse now that Hisashi had been here for 2 years. He rummaged around his room, looking for his phone. That was the first sign that something was off. His phone was gone, and he scrambled back over to his bed. Somewhere on the floor underneath was the tablet he only used for emergencies now. It was gone. Both of his only light sources were gone. Panic grips him with an icy firm hold, and Izuku sprints up the stairs. Ignoring how loud he's being, and ignoring the dozens of white eyes blinking at him. His hand is around that cold doorknob before he can even realize he's made it to the door. He twists the knob this way and that, and it doesn't open. It's locked from the outside, and a wave of terror crashes into him. He drowns in it, shaking and hyperventilating as soon as he realizes he is truly and unequivocally imprisoned in his own room. The darkness whispers to him softly, and he can't hear anything over his own fear and hysteria. His shaking hands come up to cover his face, his nails digging into his cheeks. He can think of a million things to scream, but his mouth has never been in his control. His vocal cords could never produce a sound. His face stings and his eyes burn with tears. Izuku can hear heavy footsteps venture closer to his bedroom door. Izuku freezes completely, taking a few steps down on the staircase backward. Hisashi's voice is easy to recognize. The alarms go off in his head, and he listens carefully at the words his father says. Your quirk is ugly, you're an abomination to society. So you're going to stay locked down there all day, do you understand me? Izuku finally steps off the last step and slides down into a sitting position, his nails dragging down his cheeks and chin. His teeth clang together in his mouth, and his jaw aches from clenching it too much. Even his teeth ache. His fingers dig into his neck, stinging and burning with the force of his endless scratching. The panic is rising, and he can feel his heartbeat 1,000,000 miles a second in his chest. There's a lump in his throat, and a scream begging just to be let out. The skin under his hands is warm and sticky. He can taste iron and fear coating his mouth. His fingertips are warm with his blood, but he didn't care. Those white eyes kept watching him. They kept whispering, but it might as well be roaring. Purgatory. It was a chorus of voices and guttural whines. Almost like a mob of monsters growling at him. He couldn't see their bodies in this deep darkness, but he could see their eyes, and that was enough for him. His shirt clung to him, and suddenly he was coated in sweat and prickly skin. Fear wrapped around him like a blanket, and it just wouldn't go away. He didn't want to be locked in here anymore. He wanted out. That's when he heard it, his possible escape. The sound of the only human being who he cared for more than he cared for Auntie Mitsuki. Kaken. Hey Auntie Inko, have you seen Deku around anywhere? He hasn't been answering my texts. But Izuku is frozen in place, his fingers digging into his delicate skin still. The darkness swirls and distorts before him as his mother's voice gently reaches his ears. The glow from under the basement door is the only meek source of light, and he can see the telltale sign of someone standing right in front of that door. 2 spots under the door are dark, and as he quietly walks up, he catches a glimpse of shoes. He stands a step below the door and listens. He isn't here right now, Inko merely says, her voice light and airy. Izuku can practically see her blank face and tired eyes. Her empty words mean nothing when paired with her face. It's painfully obvious to Izuku that his mother is a blank shell. But maybe it's a good enough act for Kaken because Izuku can hear his familiar footfalls begin to retreat. Closer and closer to the door. Swift and confident but heavy due to his stormy sea of anger. Izuku listens silently, not daring to move even an inch, but the white eyes hiding in the walls around him have other ideas. The demons converge, refusing to be locked up in here, and for a second he believes it's for his behalf, but that can't be right. Demons hate and want to torture everything. They hate him and they want to make him suffer, so their next move made sense only after he realized the full scope of it all. They merged together, a wet gurgling sound shook the rickety wood stairs, and Izuku blanched as the door shook and the hinges screamed. Kaken stopped in his tracks, and Izuku launched himself forward into the icy depths of the unnatural black. It was jumping in an icy cold lake in the peak of winter. It was so cold that his very bones seemed to freeze and burn. His face was numb nearly instantly as he pulled the black mass of demons toward him and away from the door. Izuku's fingers sunk in deeper to the monstrosity, slamming itself into the door and pulled physically and spiritually. The feeling in his fingers dissolved quickly as the silence beyond the door ripped at him. He messed up. This was a mistake. He was demed and cursed. This would not end well for him in the slightest. The icy feeling spread through him as if it had entered his bloodstream and began to infest him. His heart sunk in his chest as the demon mass lashed out. Its outraged scream shook the walls and the door. Izuku bared his teeth and yanked even harder, and the demons fused together faltered. Almost immediately he remembered that he was standing on the weak wooden stairs. His hair tousled in the rush of air that accompanied his quick, painful descent. His stomach plummeted to his feet, and he only had a few seconds to feel nausea before his knees and ankles ached. He tumbled down the set of stairs, rather loudly he might add. The conversation beyond that door didn't resume, and that demon mass seemed to have exploded apart. Many pairs of white eyes stared at him, grumbling and rattling wordless rasps at him. His head throbbed, and everything seemed to hurt as he stumbled to his feet. The darkness whispered against his skin, and he managed to shove the intrusive thoughts of fear so he could listen to the conversation upstairs. "What was that, Auntie Inko?" Kaken asked, sounding confused and concerned. "Are you sure you haven't seen Deku?" "Oh, I'm sure, it's just our cat. He likes to scratch strangers, so we keep him downstairs when guests are here. He has a habit of making a lot of noise too," his mother explained smoothly. It was alarming. And then, just as quickly as Kaken got there, he was gone. His escape and hope were gone. All that was left was this invading darkness and those white eyes that made him want to gouge his own out. And the impending doom of his punishment. If used correctly, his mother's quirk was quite terrifying, but he was more concerned about his father if he was being honest. The duality of his quirk was concerning, and the ease of which it could be used for villainy was also a cause for fear and horror. He waited with bated breath, chewing at his lip and pinching the skin off in his mouth. It didn't really hurt, it was more of a nervous tick than anything. Like how people bit the skin off their bottom lip. He did that too and chewed his fingernails. He watched that door with sickening anticipation because he knew what was coming, he just didn't know who would dish it out. For a few long minutes, it was nearly silent. Eerily so, as the floor creaked just above him. The door up those narrow stairs jingled loudly before something heavy thumped onto the floor. A few seconds later that door creaked open and a little light shone through. It brought him no comfort as his mother's honey-like voice reached him. "Izuku dear, get up here." It was too cheerful and too much like how a real mother would speak to him. So much like a demon imitating a demon like in movies, its effect was exactly the opposite of what his mother probably wanted. She probably wanted to lull into a false sense of security, but Izuku wasn't stupid. It made that same icy feeling from grabbing those demons slam into him again. This time it felt even worse. Izuku, despite knowing that he had no choice but to go, stood still as a statue. It was strange and he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to see what awaited him. He really didn't. "My boy, if you don't get up here right now I swear to God dash." And Izuku rocketed himself up the stairs, knowing full well that his father wasn't afraid to go down into his room. He'd drag him by the ankles up those stairs if he had to. Izuku was engulfed in the light as soon as he left his room, his eyes burning as they adjusted. Inko stood well enough away, looking absolutely sad. Hisashi had his arms crossed, looking like a real angry father for only a second. The malice coming off him in waves was overwhelming, and Izuku had to duck his head away with urgency. He waited, staring directly at his feet. His fists were clenched at his sides and he practically jumped 5 feet in the air when Inko was the first to speak. "Drink this," she merely said, holding a glass of water. She must have snuck off silently while he stared at the ground in horror. Izuku grabbed it quickly and downed it faster than he thought he could. Izuku didn't care if it contained a lethal poison or sedative drug. He just did what his mother told him to do. If it meant he had to drink this, he was fine with it. If this was his punishment, it was a mercy. Izuku handed the glass back, and Inko disappeared for a few seconds into the kitchen and Hisashi took the spotlight. "Your mother is truly a brilliant woman, I wouldn't have thought of that in a million years," Hisashi told him. Izuku blinked slowly, in fact, everything was slower. His chest ached, and nausea racked him in waves. He couldn't breathe, and suddenly he had a face full of floor. It was like an elephant was sitting on his back, and whatever was in that drink wasn't good, he quickly decided. Was it really poison? Was this what the demon had been warning him about? His gut told him that either way, something was gone. Something was repressed and stripped away from him. It hurt, it hurt. He covered his mouth with his hand, as he nearly dry heaved. His stomach was doing backflips, and his heart was twisting and beating erratically in his chest. There wasn't enough air. He blinked through the blurry haze as Hisashi crouched to his level. Izuku raised his head. "Wait." Hisashi grabbed a handful of his green curly hair and jerked his head up. That was more accurate. His words were unintelligible, and Izuku completely blanked. He seemed pretty heated. "You deserve fault stupid quirk. Cursed boy hated." Everything was muted. Izuku couldn't understand a single thing happening. Those words were lost on him for now. Suppressants. He was wrong. He understood that in perfect clarity. That water was filled with quirk suppressants, and that's why he felt so weird and sick. He felt like he was high and drunk at the same time, and it was strange. It was a great escape once the pain and nausea subsided. It was like he wasn't attached to his body anymore. Hisashi helped him to his feet and practically threw him back into his room. Izuku couldn't see those white eyes for the first time. He couldn't hear the screaming. He couldn't feel that fear. This drag numbed everything, even his quirk. Izuku was in love with it, until he woke up the next morning. The crash was a beach, his lungs and chest screaming and aching like he just ran a marathon. He couldn't even move, every muscle burned and stung in agony. Every shift or twitch made him bite back a roar of pain. He was wrong. He was wrong, so wrong. That drag was torture. And they gave it to him again. Hisashi has snuck into his room and forced him to drink it again, and that same euphoric feeling calmed him for only an hour before he crashed again, only this time it was worse. His weekend was a haze of highs and lows, literally. Either he was high off his but thanks to this drag, or he was bedridden, on the verge of ending it all so he didn't have to feel anything anymore. His fingers itched for anything sharp while he came down off the high. Maybe cutting his own head off would be better than suffering through another dose of this sheet. All weekend he was tense, waiting to hear his father's footsteps. Waiting for that beautiful wave of euphoria but dreading that all-too-consuming wave of agony. He was eager to go back to school and avoid home as much as possible. He was eager to see Kaken again and forget about all of this as soon as he could. All he knew was that he didn't see those all-seeing white eyes anymore and he didn't hear that endless hair-raising screaming. The fear of the dark was always there though, even if he didn't want it to be. No amount of drags could put a stop to that. No matter how much he prayed for it and hoped. Izuku woke up on Monday morning with sore muscles and a throbbing head. He managed against all odds to get up from his bed and grab his school uniform and put it on. His steps were near silent on the wooden stairs, as he made his quick ascent up them. The door opened easily and Izuku let out the tiniest of relieved sighs before making like a bat out of hell out of that house. Once the front door closed softly behind him, he took a chance to breathe at ease for once. The sky outside was still dark and gloomy, but he could see Kaken waiting for him a little ways away. Deku, where the F were you all weekend? Kaken asked immediately. Izuku offered him a vague shrug in response. Did Kaken really think he'd respond with words? Izuku stared at Kaken as he watched his expression change to one of annoyance. Izuku gave him a weak smile, and he must look like sheep because Kaken sighs softly and drops it for now. Their walk to school is unusual and quiet for once, and Kaken lets Izuku lean against him when they finally get to class. Izuku doesn't remember much of class, or anything if he was being honest. He must have fallen asleep a couple of times, or maybe he zoned out completely. He vaguely remembered Kaken dragging him to lunch and making him eat something, but he wasn't too sure. He was concerned about it and how it must look to Kaken, but he couldn't control any of this. He was lucky that Kaken even cared, and had the compassion to help him out while he was out of commission like this. He didn't even remember that Kaken was taking him to his house tonight until Auntie Mitsuki greeted him with a bright smile. Things got less hazy from there, and the Bakugus looked relieved. They asked him what he did over the weekend and he responded with finishing his art project, and that he completely forgot that Kaken wanted to hang out. That's understandable, Auntie Mitsuki replied. What did you make? Izuku quickly reached into his backpack and grabbed his sketchbook. Which drawing could he show them? A lot of them were drawn in charcoal, some of them were hastily drawn and smeared. Most of them weren't drawings of people either, they were of those creatures with the white eyes. They were drawn horribly, and they carried a certain amount of terror with each drawing. The eyes were large, colorless holes, and their hands were long and needle-like. Some had white smiles and some were ripping their skin off. There was the rare picture of Kaken leaning against a wall, or an even rarer one where he was grinning. When he wasn't drawing scary demons, he nearly drew Kaken exclusively. As a kid, as an adult, as a teen, as a pro-hero. He stopped at one with the hero design he created not too long ago. Kaken was sporting a pharaoh-like smile, his grenade-shaped gauntlets weighing down his wrists and forearms. He stood with one arm up wiping the sweat off his brow, and the other swinging lazily in the wind. Behind him was a massive mess of concrete debris and the road was littered with explosion-like craters. Izuku quickly displayed with detailed drawing to the family before him, and Mitsuki snatched it as soon as she saw it. Izuku's heart clenched in his chest, worried she'd flip through the pages and see the other drawings that weren't as perfect and unconcerning. Luckily she didn't, and she passed it to her husband who studied it in awe, who passed it to Kaken. He looked like a tomato, embarrassed but also impressed at the same time, which made Izuku fuzzy and warm. Is this a new costume design for me? Kaken asked. I think it's the best you've come up with so far. Izuku nodded enthusiastically. Kaken grinned slightly at him and handed him the notebook back. You're crazy good at drawing. Now it was Izuku's turn for his face to heat up. Kaken smirked at him and they went into his room where 1 or 2 All Might posters adorned his walls. There was one poster of Eraserhead and Present Mike. The pair of them sat down on the bed and Kaken gave him the set of notes he's missed all day. Izuku was quick to copy them down and silently thanked Kaken profusely in his head. "Are you sick?" Izuku looked away from Kaken, but he knew Kaken would get it out of him eventually, so he nodded curtly without looking in his direction. He laid down on the massive bed and angled his body away from the other boy. "If you were sick, why did you come to school?" Izuku shrugged, groaning lightly when Kaken draped himself over Izuku's stomach. Kaken was half on the bed, and half hanging off it trying to reach something. Izuku glared at him, confused yet slightly amused. Kaken pushes himself back onto the bed once he got whatever he was trying to reach. A blank notebook and pen was thrown in his direction and Izuku sighed shortly through his nose to voice his annoyance. Kaken sat up completely, crossing his ankles over each other, and stared at Izuku expectantly. Izuku cocked up an eyebrow. "I'm gonna ask you a question, shitnerd?" Izuku flipped him off with a smile and nodded. "Answer honestly." He nodded, but had no intention of being honest depending on the question. "It's well. Izuku gave him a concerned look as Kaken attempted to form his sentence. "Do you have a quirk?" Izuku nearly laughed. Kaken had been his friend his entire life, and he was asking quirkless Izuku Midoriya if he had a quirk. The answer was an easy lie. "Come on Kaken, you already knew that." Kaken grinned slightly. I know. Izuku crumpled up the paper and waited for the real question. It came quickly after Kaken's response to his sass. "Is Dai's Auntie Inko treating you good?" "What kind of question is that, Kaken?" "A valid question. What I guess I mean is she hurting you?" Kaken asked warily, wringing his fingers together. Izuku tore at his lower lip with his teeth, his skin becoming slick with sweat. "Of course not. I'm going home, that was rude." Izuku stood quickly, leaving the notebook and pen behind. He swung open Kaken's bedroom door and was halfway to the front door when he heard Kaken's heavy footsteps. He hesitated for not a second, but it was enough for Kaken to catch him. "Deku, wait." Kaken pleaded. I don't think she's actually got I'm just worried you look like sheet, like you got hit by a train or something. You couldn't even stay awake in class and you didn't respond to any of my questions all day. You've got bruises everywhere and your hands are all effed up and ripped open. There are scratches on your throat. How is that not concerning? How is that not a red flag, Izuku?" Kaken's hand wrapped around Izuku's wrist and tugged. Izuku didn't turn to face him, wrenching his arm away from the blonde's grip. He heard the other boy growl and glanced back. Kaken's hands were carding through his unmanageable hair, and he looked like he just ate something sour or something absolutely disgusting. His face was pale, but Izuku didn't stop. He tore at the inner lining of his mouth, feeling out the irregularities with his tongue as he made a quick departure. "Izuku!" His heart ached for Kaken, but he couldn't risk that secret becoming a known fact in the Bakugo household. Who knew what would happen if Inko and Hisashi found out? How long would it remain abuse, and not the newest homicide in Mizudafu, Japan? Is it him? He made no indication that he heard Kaken's outburst and took the quickest route home. He didn't hear any telltale signs of Kaken following him, which was a major relief. He cut through unsavory alleyways to save time and to avoid Kaken if he was trying to find him. This particular alleyway was littered with foul-smelling trash and only one sleeping homeless person. The alleyway was dark due to the setting sun that set the sky on fire. The orange and red rays made everything seem a little more sinister, not that Izuku minded in the least. Izuku's life was cut from the same cloth as horror movies were. His life was a living, breathing nightmare with sharp claws and entrancing eyes. It seemed innocent on the surface, but if anyone managed to delve deep and break the surface apart, they would see nothing but darkness. Darkness and hell. He clenched his fists as he walked. How would he fix this new array of problems with Kaken? How could he get him off his trail? He was so engrossed in that train of thought, and the thousands of answers that came with it when something dropped from the sky. But wait, it wasn't something, or someone. It was the sludge villain, its dark green slime familiar and sickening as he was harshly reminded of the strangulation he suffered at the hands of this villain. It took me long enough to find you again, Izuku Midoriya. Nice to see you. Maybe this time I'll kill you. Izuku backed away, heart slamming in his ribcage with vigor. His hands were slack at his sides, but his eyes were wild and reckless with anxiousness. He made the mistake of glancing behind him in search of escape. It was futile, and in that millisecond the villain lunged. Izuku didn't dodge in time, but somehow he was out of the way in an instant. Ice encased his wrist, and he hissed through his teeth. He glared at the black figure yanking him away, and ripped himself free. He was mildly grateful, but he didn't like the demons. Izuku was determined to keep them at a distance and pretend they didn't exist. Don't struggle, it makes everything worse. The sludge villain screamed, and Izuku attacked this time, his eyes scanning the liquid body before him. Were there any obvious weaknesses? His eyes locked onto that villain's eyes and it clicked almost audibly in his mind. Of course, the only solid part of him would be a weakness. That same feeling of ice crept over his skin again, and Izuku begrudgingly did the only natural thing that he could think of. That demon's hand caressed his own, and he gripped that hand tightly and pushed everything he had into it. His entire arm tensed and went ramrod straight. Fire burst from his skin, it was sizzling and burning like a piece of meat. Or maybe he wasn't on fire, maybe his arm was being ripped off. That would make more sense, as he watched the demon distort, enlarge and then turn back to its original size. The demon looked more defined than usual, and more human-like. Black flames glimmered in each of its hands, and it grinned at him gleefully. Without being told, it launched itself at the sludge villain. The slime stood no chance as the otherworldly fire came into contact with it. It melted away and wisps of evaporated liquid wafted into the air. It smelled awful, even worse than this alleyway. Some of the slime fell off like wet slabs of meat coming off a melting corpse. A morbid analogy, but true nonetheless as Izuku watched the sludge villain fall. While that demon had the villain distracted, Izuku rummaged through his bag in search of something sharp. He was hoping to find a pencil or a pen, but he truly struck gold when he found a pair of very, very sharp scissors. He grinned to himself, and that demon giggled. What the hell is this thing? Izuku raised an eyebrow, before the demon answered, sounding concerningly more human than before. Demon. You see? He gaped at the sludge villain as he nodded frantically. Greetings, came a guttural response that shook the very ground they stood on. Izuku felt every hair on his body rise in horror and astonishment. The sludge villain could see that monster? Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe his quirk was practical in combat. It was a horrible but thrilling idea. So was it the energy he pushed into it that made it stronger? This was very bad. This was a mistake. He needed to end this now before the sun set for the night. He needed to pretend this never happened. No one could know about his quirk. His mother and father would be absolutely furious if they found out his quirk had uses. He gripped the scissors tightly in his hands, his grip so tight that the scissors creaked and shook in his hand. The lunge towards the sludge villain's eyes was painfully easily. The scissors were sharp enough to cut through both eyes like water, but that might be because of the villain's body being made of mainly sludge and slime. Deep green liquid sprayed everywhere, and it was safe to assume that it was blood. The sharp tang of iron hung in the air, and the sludge villain screamed and thrashed like a fatally injured deer. Izuku grimaced as he stared at the dark green stained scissors. The demon who assisted him was long gone, after Izuku had a quick survey of the surroundings. He'd dwell on that later, but now he needed to get away. Right now he needed to not be here when Authritz arrived. He shouldered his backpack back on and hid the bloody scissors as he left the alleyway and entered another. His blood was pounding in his ears, and his fingers were cold and shaking. He'd hurt someone for the first time, and he felt sick with fear and regret. Even though he was a villain, the sludge villain was still in fact a person. A person Izuku hurt to defend and protect himself. The alleyways got concerningly darker, but Izuku was getting closer and closer to home, trying to discard any lingering thoughts of the villain. Izuku stopped at the front door and listened. The house was dark and it was silent. It was getting rapidly darker by the second outside, and Izuku liked his lips anxiously. His breath hitched slightly when a black cat swaggered by, and he could see a black figure approaching him. He couldn't tell if it was a demon or a person, and he wasn't going to stick around to find out. He opened the door silently and locked it behind him. The carpeted floor silenced his footsteps, and he avoided a figure who was trying to reach out to him from the kitchen. Its arms were so long that went through him anyway when he tried to avoid it. His chest froze where the demon touched him, but he ignored it in favor of going into the bathroom. His parents were nowhere to be seen, and as alarming as that was, he took this moment to completely relax for the first time in a while. He tiptoed into the bathroom, closing the door before he turned on the light just in case. Izuku put his elbows on the sink and put his head in his hands. He took much-needed deep breaths and forced his muscles to relax. The occasions where he could do this was so rare that he immersed himself in it. He rolled the dice and took a quick shower as fast as he could possibly manage. He got out feeling refreshed and put on the same clothes he'd been previously wearing. He'd change out of them soon enough. He dressed himself and stared at the mirror once he was fully clothed. He studied the bruises on his skin and the scratches he'd given himself during his mental breakdown. Kaken was right, he did look like Sheet. He was busy staring at his bruises, but he didn't fail to notice that the mirror shifted and moved. Behind him a black figure rose to its full height, too tall to be anywhere near human. Izuku stared at it as his hands in the mirror moved by themselves. He was ripping at his own skin, red beads of blood dripped into the sink, and Izuku stared in horror as he realized that it wasn't blood. It was black. His skin fell into the sink with a wet slap, and half of his face was that of a demon with gleaming teeth. Izuku choked back the urge to vomit right there, right this second. Haha, point one of us. One of us. Demon. The demonic half of his face was speaking, forming each word with some level of difficulty. Izuku backed away, tripping when he stumbled slightly. He touched his own skin frantically, relieved that his skin was smooth and dry. The mirror was empty now, nothing stood in it or stared at Izuku. He stood with a shaking hands and wobbly legs. He swung open the door and turned the light off before he practically launched himself into the basement where more white eyes waited. What he wouldn't give for a dose of that insane drag Hisashi gave him the other day. Izuku stumbled down the stairs, his breathing heavy and labored with adrenaline and horror. He changed out of his school uniform quickly and wore his hoodie and sweatpants and crawled into his bed. Out of habit, he ran his hands over the covers and searched for his phone. Of course it wasn't there, he thought to himself, as he brushed against the cold screen. He latched onto it immediately and powered it up. The light was blinding, but a comfort he'd missed for too long. That hallucination still stood in the back of his mind, itching at him and terrifying him. He should be used to it now, the crazy visions the demons gave him when he was alone and vulnerable. Izuku crept out of bed, his light source clutched defiantly in one hand as he searched through his small dark room. He found his discarded backpack easier than he expected and ripped it open. His hands begged to do something, whether it was draw or analyze his own quirk he couldn't decide. So he grabbed his ratty notebooks, one gray and one black. Written in shaky Japanese was his quirk analysis book. No, not the one he used on a regular basis for his peers' quirks, but the one specifically for his own. The gray notebook was his sketch journal that was nearly full cover to cover with gory, dark drawings that could put him in a mental institution if they knew he saw these things on a regular basis. Figures with white eyes and no pupils were his specialty of sorts. Almost every single page was a different unique-looking monster. Some had long claws that dragged across the page, too long to draw. He flipped through loads of drawings, some drawn in perfect detail but unfinished. Some half-drawn, shakily and hastily. Some were drawings from his memories, like the first night he had his quirk and stayed in that dark basement. A long demon hovered over his bed, nearly nose to nose with him, looking like a massive spider. Another page was completely black. In fact, sometimes that's all he could draw for days, and it showed. He flipped through more pages that were just black. Sometimes when he went through his sketchbook, he noticed a few drawings he couldn't remember drawing. This was one of these times, as he came across a series of drawings that acted as a flip book. At first it was all black, but as he flipped through faster and faster, a black figure grew bigger and bigger in the darkness, only discernible by a thin white outline detailing the claws, torso, and head. White eyes stared at him, and as he continued to leaf through this mini flip book it drew closer and closer. Until it stopped, and there were words written in white. Words he'd heard so many times and just learned to accept. God doesn't shine upon you. Izuku stares at it for a while, trying to recall a time when he'd drawn something like this and couldn't pinpoint a time. Izuku just turned to a fresh page and began to draw anything that came to mind. He sat on the cool ground and propped his phone up as it projected light from its flashlight setting and watched as his hands almost moved on their own and drew. It started as a black, chalky residue rubbing off onto his hands. The piece of charcoal in his hand wasn't thin like a pencil, and it worked wonders for the kinds of things he drew. He left white slits for eyes and his hand began to move faster and faster. The body came into being, and the mouth was wide open, gleaming white and too big to be natural. Its claws were at its head, clawing away at its skin, not that anyone who didn't have his quirk would be able to tell if he showed them. He took a long look at it, hating the drawing almost immediately. Izuku hated all of his drawings except the ones he drew of Kaken. Izuku slammed his book shut and glanced over at his other notebook. He opened it and stared at the first page. Quirk Analysis, Izuku Midoriya. Age, 6, 7, 9, 10, 12, 14. Parents, Inko Midoriya and Hisashi Midoriya. Inko, Attraction Quirk, Small Objects. Toys, Salt and Pepper Shakers, Chess Pieces, Pencils and Knives. Hisashi, Gone. Izuku scratched out Hisashi's status and added his quirk. Hisashi, Gone. 5-finger contact activation. Half pain and half panic. His left hand activates pain, and the right activated panic. Used as a means of torture. Plausible villain. Why did he come back? Izuku, developed quirk at 4, can see monsters. Demons. The monsters can interact with the real world on a small scale. Scratching chalkboards. No one can hear it but me. They can open doors, close doors, turn on lights. They can scream loudly. If I put my energy into them, other people can see them, and they can attack. Avoid doing that. Quirk suppressors can help get rid of them. Demons can make vivid hallucinations. Quirk has no applicable uses in hero or rescue work. Villain's quirk. Better to use quirk suppressants and get rid of it altogether. Quirkless. 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 Relation to parents' quirks, none. No similarities like most people. Not a combination. Completely new and different from Inko and Hisashi's quirk. Mutation. Izuku looked over the notes and raised his eyebrows. He really didn't know much about his quirk, huh? Something told him it was probably better that way. Here, take these, they'll make you feel better. He didn't believe Hisashi's words, but he downed the pills anyway that afternoon after having a hell of a time getting Kaken to leave him alone. For once his father let him leave the house for the night, but not without a slur being thrown his way. The door clicked softly behind him as he headed straight for the nearest store. Yesterday he'd finally used up the last few pages of his sketchbook, and he couldn't go without a new one if he wanted to remain sane. Izuku knew the way to the store by heart because he used to pick up things for his mother as a kid. The path there was desolate of people, and Izuku preferred it that way until he spotted something not human. He felt a flicker of fear at first, but it quickly became overshadowed by annoyance because he just wanted to be left alone. They were always lurking and jeering, and Izuku detested it. He picked up his pace, turning the corner to the small convenience store just on the next corner. But it turned out that power walking was too much for him at the moment, or maybe the meds were finally kicking in. That dark figure flickered in and out of existence before becoming just a gray screen of smoke. Izuku's world tilted on its axis, but he fought down the onslaught of nausea. He really needed a new sketchbook. Izuku couldn't live without it. It was like every time he thought about not having one, he felt like he was dunked in a bucket of ice. He'd fight the sickness in his stomach and head to a nearby park as soon as possible once he bought his new notebook. He entered the small store and was quick to retrieve what he needed. The cashier was a nice old lady who never stopped droning on and on about her son, who was a friendly neighborhood hero. Izuku indulged her by nodding at the right spots in the conversation and smiling when she bid him a good day. Izuku was leaving the store when a man with black hair pulled into bun walked in. His hair was frizzy and looked pretty unmanageable, but Izuku wasn't one to judge. He was wearing a scarf and tracksuit, looking extremely at ease and relaxed. Izuku envied him as the man whistled as he walked, a paw sticking out of his scarf. Izuku raised an eyebrow before something soft was launched at him. He was lucky his reaction time was sharper than a blade, as he caught this random butt cat mid-flight. It was all black and had a smushed face. At first, his mind went blank, panicking for a few seconds before the cat meowed at him. His shoulders relaxed, and the man who supposedly had a cat in his scarf glared at the black mass in Izuku's hands. "Get down, dumbass, you're being rude." Izuku smiled weakly, expecting the cat to jump off of him, but that didn't happen. It burrowed itself into Izuku's chest and purred. "All right, ignore me." Then, the man disappeared deeper into the store, and Izuku looked at the cat, confused. The cat just rested in his hands and purred even more, and it was relaxing. Izuku smiled slightly and barely took notice of the blurry vision that was creeping in on him. It stayed in the edges of his vision, so he didn't worry about it too much. Izuku just really hoped that the black-haired man would come back for his cat eventually. His arms were beginning to tire, and that's when he reappeared carrying a single bag with what looked like instant coffee. "Quit bothering the kid, Eclipse. It's time to go home." The cat meowed at Izuku before hopping out of his arms and onto the floor easily. "Sorry about that, you're not allergic to cats, are you?" Izuku shook his head vehemently. "That's good." "Sorry again, he kinda does what he wants. See ya around, I guess," and he took his leave. He was left staring after him, clutching his own bag with his notebook in it. Then he left too, heading in the opposite direction of that man, craving that warmth that the cat provided. Izuku had always wanted a pet, but for obvious reasons never brought it up to Inko. He cut through the street, approaching the park across the street so he could sit for a while and draw. The sun was more than halfway through the sky, casting warm light across the park where kids screamed and played. He took a seat on a vacant bench and brought out his new sketchbook. He'd bought a few pens and pencils, but he had a feeling he wouldn't be using them. He had snuck a few pieces of charcoal into his pockets and drew them out of his pockets, his hands already itching to draw and create. For a long time, the only sound was the scratching of the charcoal against his sketchbook as his thoughts ran wild. Kaken had been very apologetic today, but he also seemed pretty distracted. Yui's entrance exam would happen as soon as summer vacation began, and summer was coming quicker than either of them had thought. Izuku hated summer in all honesty because he spent much of it locked down in his room and wishing he was somewhere, anywhere else. It was spent cold with fear and horror. He was secretly hoping summer would end as soon as possible, and it hasn't even begun. Then again, he was chomping at the bit for the Yui entrance exam as well because he wanted to go with Kaken. It didn't matter if he was in general studies as long as they were together. On top of being with Kaken, Yui also offered all year-round dorms for everyone attending the school. That was definitely a selling point for him. He'd sell an arm and a leg to get out of that house for more than a few hours a day. He took his time drawing anything that came to mind. For a while it was a half-finished drawing of the other night in the bathroom. Half of his face was full black save for the white eyes and white teeth. He left it unfinished so he could start drawing a patch of flowers sitting in front of him. Luckily flowers still satisfied his need to draw, as he meticulously sketched out each petal and stem. It was kind of relaxing to draw something tangible and alive that wasn't Kaken. It was nearly therapeutic, the motion of blowing away excess charcoal and creating curling lines. The picture came together pretty well, and Izuku was happy about it. Maybe he should pick up painting because he felt like that would be pretty fun and different from his usual stuff. For a while he debated it, basking in the sunlight that he rarely had time to appreciate. Most of his time was spent in darkness in terror. Maybe he should give himself a splash of color and excitement, but he didn't have money, nor the ball to ask for some from his mother or father. Izuku closed his sketchbook quietly and closed his eyes. He couldn't ask for anything from his parents. It was hard enough to ask to go outside. His life was so controlled and contained. The sudden realization of his dire situation was like being hit by a train. Normal kids could ask for nearly anything without feeling icy fear in the pit of their stomachs. They could live their daily lives feeling a sense of safety, but Izuku didn't know what that really felt like. In the absence of love and safety, only fear and hopelessness were allowed to fester. Izuku wasn't stupid, he knew what was happening and he knew on a subconscious level that it was wrong. But he accepted it as his way of life, and that was the damning fact that kept him in this situation. He was too accustomed to this environment to want to change and to realize that he needed a different space and different people. He was too scared to hope for it. Too scared and unsure to work for it. Izuku licked at his lips and let out a voiceless sigh. Sleeping, are we? Izuku's eyes were opened immediately, scanning his surroundings. His eyes locked with a pair of blue ones that bore into his very soul. Izuku stares with his mouth slightly parted, and a skeleton of a man gave him a gentle smile. He tilted his head to the side, waiting for the man to continue. Did I frighten you? I'm sorry about that, my boy. Izuku shook his head quickly and the man seemed to relax slightly. So, do you like drawing? There are smudges all over your hands. He pretended to ponder his answer for a moment, only so he could study this strange man more. He was concerningly thin and gaunt. Maybe he was anorexic? Izuku shoved the thought away almost instantly. That was rude, and even if the man was, he shouldn't think it, so he answered the man's question by nodding with a grin. His fingers sat in his lap and he wrung them anxiously at the same time. The man seemed to stare at his hands a lot, and it was making Izuku increasingly nervous. The man seemed to realize he was staring at Izuku intently and began to apologize feverishly. I'm making you nervous, aren't I? I shouldn't have disturbed you, young man, but it is weird to see a teenager out on this side of town alone and casually napping nonetheless. Izuku shrugged, always at a loss for words. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a demon skipping through the park like a little girl. He ignored it even as it stopped to stare at him. So the medicine had already gone through his system? Maybe he should take more. He was so focused on how long he'd been out today that he didn't hear anything this man had been saying. Toshinori. What's your name? Izuku grimaced and stood abruptly. He was so awkward and socially incapable of regular conversation. With his face turning rapidly redder by the second, Izuku gathered his things with a small bow in the stranger's way. Hey, are you okay? He nodded again and again, embarrassment flooding through him. If this guy asked him another question he couldn't answer, he was going to die. I really am sorry for bothering you. Izuku waves his hands placatingly as if to say it wasn't his fault and retreated with his art supplies. The man Izuku is going to take an educated guess and say his name is Toshinori. Chuckles awkwardly. Have a good night, kiddo. Izuku was gone quickly and silently. Toshinori watched him go, and he pondered where he should go. He should really head to the house, not his home. It wasn't home to him, and it was becoming increasingly clear as Hisashi pumped him full of drags and hate. He hated being there. Every step forward into that house was mudslide backward in any progress toward a normal life. There had been many times where he rejected Auntie Mitsuki's offers to help him learn sign because of anxiety and worry that came with that house and the people in it. Some days he almost said yes and instantly shoved it away. He should learn. He needs to learn if he wants to interact easier with other people. But would he need to? In all honesty, he'd been waiting his whole life for it to end. Whether it be silently, the way he came into the world, or loud, angry, violent, and hurting. More recently he'd been thinking it would probably be the violent way. The world was never fair, and he should stop hoping for it. His feet carried him halfway home and he stopped very suddenly and stared at Dagoba Beach, the only beach of Mifatsu. It was littered with trash and rarely frequented by any locals or tourists at all. A man weaved through the trash with practiced ease, and Izuku found himself wondering why anyone would be doing that. Unless they were homeless and searching for salvageable furniture and stuff. That man didn't seem to be homeless though, and it became pretty clear pretty quickly as the man approached him. He felt his heart clench in his chest like someone was twisting it in his chest. He glared menacingly at the man, who didn't seem to care that he was getting stared down by a teenager. As he got closer, Izuku noticed his strange attire. He connected the dots surprisingly fast, and he frowned at the villains standing before him. There was a white bandana with holes for his eyes covering the top half of his face. A long red scarf darker than blood adorned his neck, draping down to his ankles, stopping just before the strands touched the ground. Izuku wasn't worried about that. That wasn't the part that scared him. It was the countless weapons visible around his torso and strapped to his back. Most noticeable were the 3 katanas visible just over his shoulder. They were stained a rusty red color that didn't bode well with Izuku at all. This man was a villain, and Izuku couldn't even manage to breathe. He was frozen in fear, and as this man walked toward him, he didn't even back away like a normal human being would've. "You're Izuku Midoriya, correct?" Izuku nodded shortly and stared at him. "You don't look scared, and I can't decide if you're an inspiration or a fool." Izuku furrowed his brow. "Are you mute?" He nodded again and crossed his arms. "I thought so. My name is Kaizome, but I'm known better as Stain the Hero Killer." Stain leaned down slightly to look at Izuku in the eyes before he began to speak again. Izuku was confused as hell, wondering why he hadn't been chopped to pieces yet. Stain wasn't well known yet, but Izuku was obsessive about the pro-hero world. He knew who Stain was, and what he'd been doing. He found himself in a staring match with a hero killer. "You have a very dangerous quirk, don't you?" Stain grins. "One your mother refuses to acknowledge, and one that can make you the most powerful villain in the world if you let it. You think it's horrible and you want to suppress it, but you are wrong. Pretending it doesn't exist makes it harder to control and causes more problems than solutions. Your mother and father will abuse you no matter what you do. I saw you attack that sludge villain when you were 12. I've been watching you ever since, and I've decided that you're worthy. Why am I approaching you now after all this time? The UE entrance exam is soon. Your quirk could easily make you the perfect villain, but it could also make you a hero. Your quirk isn't what makes you a hero or a villain, it's what you do with it that separates one from the other. I want to help you become a hero if that's what you want. You remind me a lot of myself in my younger years, but no one approached me to offer me salvation when I fell into the darkness of the villain leagues and vigilantism. I'm offering you a raft in the ocean that will surely drown you, Midoriya, if you don't get on. I know how this road ends. It's a dark, lonely road, boy, and I can help you avoid that at all costs. What do you say? Will you become my apprentice and survive, or will you suffer long enough that you see yourself become a villain?" Stain's words struck him deep somewhere. He didn't even realize that the wetness on his cheeks was his own tears until Stain pressed something into his palm and turned to leave. He took a shuddering breath as Stain veered into the nearest alleyway and vanished like smoke. Izuku was left on that abandoned road next to a sheet ton of trash, crying his eyes out. Unfolded the piece of paper Stain handed him and smiled slightly at the words written on it in hasty handwriting, his chest heavy. "Dagoba Beach tomorrow afternoon." He tucked away the note into his pocket, sniffling and wiping away the wetness off his cheeks. No one had ever said something quiet like that to him in his lifetime. It was constantly being beaten down and emotionally destroyed by both of his parents. The only praise he got was from Kaken and Auntie Mitsuki whenever he managed to hang out with them. It was a foreign experience and he didn't really know how to feel about it. As he finally began to walk again, he couldn't stop thinking about how much Stain knew about him already. How did he find out about his mother and father's less than kind treatment of him? Stain had been watching him since he was 12, so maybe he'd gotten the hint over the years? Or maybe he snuck into the house. An even more terrifying thought struck him. Did Stain have solid evidence to support it? Would he show it to the authorities if he refused to be his apprentice and get him put in foster care? That would be the worst possible outcome, he quickly concluded, trying to stop his shaking hands. Izuku no longer had a choice. He had to go, and he had to make sure Stain didn't have any ulterior motives. It was more difficult than Izuku thought it would be to get Kaken to go home and leave him alone for the day. The school year was coming to a close quickly, and the high school entrance exams would take place before then. He had 3 months to train with Stain before the entrance exam if he took the man up on his crazed offer. It was a long shot, and Izuku was almost certain he was going to refuse. The sun was blossoming in beautiful oranges and reds, casting the world in a golden glow. The walk was quick, but the demons seemed to be more curious today. Practically a mob of them walked with him, craning their necks to spot the villain named Stain. He reached Dagobah Beach without incident and scanned the piles of trash to find him. At first, he felt extremely stupid as he searched, feeling like Stain had done this all as a prank to make him feel like shit. Then he saw it. A tall, terrifying figure crouching on the tallest pile of trash. The sun cast a golden glow around Stain as he stood to his full height looking like a stone gargoyle coming to life on a castle roof. "You're here earlier than I thought you would be. Did you come here straight away?" Izuku nodded with wide eyes as Stain leaned over the pile of trash and stared down at him. Izuku strained his neck trying to look at his face, and Stain grinned at him slightly. A lot of his weapons were gone today, he noticed. He almost yelped when Stain landed near silently next to him and asked, "Well, have you made a decision?" Had he? Could he trust a criminal to train him? No, he wasn't a criminal, he was a serial killer. Those two words sent ice skittering down his spine and caused goosebumps to blossom on his arms and neck. Stain seemed to be genuinely curious to hear his answer, and he wasn't reaching for the only katana he'd brought today. "You can tell me no if you want, I won't kill you," Stain told him, with a quick glance around the beach. "What'll it be, Midoriya?" Strangely enough, Izuku didn't feel as threatened as he thought he would. Yes, he was absolutely shaking and terrified, but he wasn't hyperventilating and running like he thought he would. Stain held out a single hand, covered in nasty scars. Izuku's mind was hopping back and forth between answers, weighing the pros and cons. He could list many, many cons. 1. Stain could easily kill him at any point. 2. He could prove to be useless and weak, and Stain would give up. 3. This was all a ploy to get a chance to kill him. 4. He'd be forced to be a villain. 5. He'd get hurt. The number of pros was scarce. He could become strong and eventually become a hero. He could learn to defend himself even if Stain deemed him unworthy at the end of the line. That was probably the end of the pros, and yet, he felt the pros, no matter how few there were, outweighed the cons. His hand was shaking Stain's hand before he even realized it. "Good, we start now." And that's how Izuku landed on his back in less than 2 seconds, being thrown like a ragdoll over Stain's shoulder in a judo flip. All the air seemed to leave his lungs, and he wheezed, trying to remember how to breathe. First lesson, always be ready for battle, no matter what. Izuku took a deep breath before scrambling on the sand to stand. "Right now you lack muscles to do any real damage, but I have a plan for you. Do you see this beach all around us? Do you see all this trash thrown here by landfills and locals? You'll spend your time here every day clearing away trash until there's not even a speck of trash left. Don't worry about your parents being a problem." He watched him as he explained. Stain started toward the ocean with a sinister smile. "Your father is a busy man, but he's been on vacation for too long. His employer will be happy to put him and your mother to work." The way he said it was ominous and had an undercurrent of fear. Izuku liked at his lips nervously. Who did his father work for exactly? From the way Stain said employer made it seem like the man wasn't a good person. Not in the slightest. Izuku had enough sense to avoid that topic, as Stain went on to explain how his entire schedule would change now that he was going to be training him. "Of course you'll be going to middle school until the summer begins, so that really only gives us the afternoon. That works just fine as long as we make the most of it. You'll be pushing you limits physically as well as mentally, Midoriya. Are you sure you want to do this? You could just inject yourself with quirk suppressors all of your life and live as a quirkless teen if you wanted." Izuku shook his head vigorously. "I knew I liked you for a reason, Midoriya. You're going to be a true hero worthy of the title, with that drive and determination of yours. I'm going to enjoy training you. Let's start." Katsuki was downright suspicious. Worried, anxious, and suspicious. Deku no Izuku was avoiding him ever since he mentioned something about the bruises and suspected abuse. Izuku had gotten quieter, and he didn't mean that literally. Usually, Katsuki could read him like an open book, so he would always know what Izuku was saying. Now it was like he was in a dark room with no light. Everything was blank and empty. Every smile was dark, cracking, and hurt. Izuku never needed words to communicate with Katsuki, but now it was like Katsuki was learning a different language and he had no idea how to decipher any of it into a meaning he understood. It was like getting sucker punched in the gut when Izuku jumped when Kaken grabbed his shoulder. Izuku never used to do that, but now it was a constant. Like he was preparing to get jumped at any point or something. It left Katsuki simmering with rage, and it made Izuku act even more anxious. But the rage wasn't toward him, not in the least. It was all directed towards his shitty but parents who thought it was funny to abuse a quirkless teen who was smarter than Katsuki could ever hope to be. He was an angel who didn't deserve to be hurt the way Auntie Inko and Hisashi were hurting him. Katsuki had come to firmly believe that Auntie Inko and Hisashi were hurting him. He'd even gone to school high off his, but at least he hoped Izuku was high. He couldn't exactly be sure, but Izuku was passed out the majority of that day. His pupils were massive and he walked like he was drunk. Katsuki knew it was some kind of coping mechanism he'd come up with for all the shit going down at home. Deku was constantly covered in bruises like violets blossoming on his pale skin, and his eyes always looked haunted and wild. Katsuki wanted to help him. He wanted to save him, and make him so much happier than he was now. Katsuki wouldn't admit it, but he wanted to be Izuku's knight in shining armor. Even angels needed saving, and God willing Katsuki would do exactly that. Deku used to be so bright and happy, but he was dulling. He was deteriorating right before Katsuki's eyes. Katsuki was staring blankly at the clock, kicking at his desk waiting for their lunch break. Izuku had only spared him a couple of glances as their classes wore on, and Katsuki was itching to have a chance to talk to him one-on-one when they went to lunch. He had another 10 minutes of listening to their stupid homeroom teacher talk about potential high schools they could be attending. Then there was a whole tiny speech their teacher did too. What am I saying? All of you want to go into the hero courses. The class erupted in screaming cheers, and Katsuki snorted. Yeah, like any hero school's gonna want all of you assholes. I'm going to Yui. A boy grinned playfully at him. You're so full of yourself. Bakugu. Midoriya, didn't you want to go to Yui too? Their teacher asked, getting sniggers and laughs in response. Their teacher pretended not to notice the discriminating behavior of their classmates, but Katsuki didn't let it slide. Midoriya? Isn't he like quirkless or something? Katsuki saw Deku scribbling away on his sketchbook. He glanced up momentarily, and it sent rage down Katsuki's spine. Deku was just minding his business, and he was going to ignore all the hateful comments spewed his way. Yeah. I don't know why Bakugu is friends with him, honestly. Katsuki wasn't afraid to be Deku's voice. He doesn't even talk, he's kind of creepy. It ain't none of your business if he goes to Yui or if he's quirkless. He'll fucking make it in unlike you extras. Katsuki scowled and crossed his arms defiantly as the classroom went dead silent. Any of you make another FNG comment about him and I'll. But he was practically yanked off his feet by the person he was defending. Deku gave him a blinding smile just as the release bell for lunch rang. Everyone around them practically ran out the classroom door murmuring it up to each other. Katsuki huffed out of his nose, still steaming. Deku dragged him to the lunchroom, grinning the whole way. Katsuki and Deku got in line together, Katsuki filling the silence by exchanging phones with Deku. They both found different articles on heroes and they switched off. Deku seemed extra lively today, but Katsuki was sure it was just to cheer him up after he had to yell at their classmates. It was definitely working, he realized as he found himself smiling right back at him. Katsuki grabbed both of them some food as Deku let him look at some of his more recent drawings. They were always quickly drawn and somewhat shaky. They were still FNG amazing, but this one was all calm lines and meticulously drawn. A simple patch of flowers and another one was a black cat, sitting delicately with one paw swatting at a cat toy that dangled above it. He showed his final drawing as they sat down, of a beach with a sunset. Katsuki loved all of Deku's art and sketches. You should try painting too, Katsuki told him, or maybe digital art. Deku nodded eagerly like he'd been thinking about trying it out for a while. Katsuki was sure he'd be FING amazing at it, no matter what he decided to do. He'd even make an extraordinary hero, even without a quirk. Katsuki secretly hoped that Deku got a quirk, but knew about the percentage of that happening. It was a fool's hope, but his hope nonetheless. He wanted Deku to become a hero with him. They'd be a dynamic duo, and duos always received a good fan base. They were rare, and they scarcely stayed a duo for long. But Katsuki was determined to stay with Deku no matter what. Deku was Katsuki's only friend and his best friend. They'd been friends since they were kids, and Katsuki didn't stop being his friend just because he stopped talking and never developed his quirk. It really hoped Deku managed to get into Yui with him. Deku was amazingly bright and intelligent, and if either of them got in, it would probably be Deku. He could even get in by submitting a portfolio to Yui before they took the entrance exam together. He could easily attract a good amount of attention from a lot of teachers like that, and if he got a good score on the exam, his acceptance would be guaranteed. He decided to tell Deku this, and Deku looked at him like it was the best idea he'd ever had in his life. You could submit some of your art to Yui before the exam. They'd give you a scholarship. Deku's chopsticks hung loosely and lazily from his fingers, and after staring straight at Katsuki, he got out his sketchbook. Katsuki could practically see the gears turning in the other boy's head, and decided it'd be better if he left him alone for a while. He ate in comfortable silence with Deku, and the only sounds were their classmates screaming at each other from across the room. He finished his food quickly, and quietly asked Deku if he was done too, and grabbed his plate from him. A little while later, the bell rang to send them to their next class, which was History of Quirks. It was the most boring and long-winded class in Katsuki's opinion. Of course, knowing Deku, the other boy loved it. Katsuki sat down at one of the rickety desks in front of Deku and stared at the clock, already begging for this class to be over before it began. They were reviewing everything right now because they only had a few months before they took entrance exams for high school. The teacher who taught this class was older than dirt, with white wispy hair. "All right, everyone. As all of you know, the year is drawing to an end. Seeing as all of you are moving on to high school, it is my duty to ensure that you pass your final. As a result, we'll start reviewing right away." The old man looked at all of them with a wrinkling smile. "All of you should be familiar with the dawn of the quirk age, but we're reviewing it anyway." Katsuki heard a few groans, and he was positive he heard Deku scribbling away on his sketchbook. Quirks officially came into the spotlight and began to sprout up during. Contrary to your history textbooks, new information on the beginning of quirks has surfaced. They are thought to have begun in medieval times a little after 476 AD. During this time, kings, queens, and the like were very prominent in Europe, but stories and mythical creatures were also. Witches, wizards, werewolves, vampires, and abominable monsters are all thought to be quirks before they were quirks. This time is the true beginning of quirks, but they weren't called as such. Quirks came back into the spotlight during 2050. At this time, two strong figures rose to power. Their quirks are still very unknown, and anything about these two individuals was erased or forgotten. What we never forgot was that they existed, and they started the boom of quirks. These two were enemies, and the first documentation of a hero versus villain situation in our era. The two fought a lot, and during a particularly nasty fight was when the world turned against the idea of quirks. The casualties were at an all-record high thanks to the devastating destruction caused by this fight. Quirk protests sparked all around Japan during this time, but the world was changing and people soon began to realize that. Boycotts began everywhere in Japan, and segregation was becoming a very real problem. After many rallies and court cases to allow people with quirks the same rights as everyone else, peace was achieved between the two different peoples. Skip toward a few years, and quirkless people were becoming outnumbered, and led to our time now, where quirkless people are a very rare occurrence. Katsuki saw how the teacher stopped to glance in Izuku's direction, and he felt himself begin to heat up. That BSRD. He was about to stand up and rock this old guy's sheet when he felt something tug at his shirt. He glanced behind him to find Deku scowling at the teacher and holding onto Katsuki's shirt to keep him from doing something stupid. Katsuki sighed loudly. And now it seems as if the tables have turned against the quirkless, and they are the ones being discriminated against. Anyone unlucky enough to be diagnosed quirkless, which is determined by your number of toe joints one has been bullied relentlessly in recent history. Contrary to public opinion, I believe that quirkless people shouldn't be bullied or discriminated against. That makes us no better than our ancestors, and quirkless people are just a lot more vulnerable than people with quirks. We should be protecting them, not hurting them or bullying them for no reason. If I catch any of you doing that, you will be sent to the principal's office. Am I clear? Katsuki liked this teacher. He glanced behind him and saw Deku gaping at their history teacher. Kaizome watched his new pupil constantly. He followed him to school and waited for him to get out of school and then continued to follow him. It wasn't because he'd taken a liking to him, no, it was because his villain alias Stain had a lot of nasty enemies. He didn't want his student out of commission before he even had a chance to see what he was made of. He was pretty 100% sure that Midoriya was made of some tough sheet. He saw it in those dark eyes, dark, wild and strong. Saw it in the way he worked when they trained. He didn't slack or stop when he was exhausted. He saw that fire igniting in that boy's heart after it had been stomped out so long ago, merely a wisp of smoke when Kaizome approached him. It was only a flicker right now, but Kaizome knew that fire would set everything alight. Right now Midoriya was dark and depressing, but Kaizome would kindle that flame and make him a hero. Midoriya would be that ray of sunshine he used to be when he was 11, Kaizome would make sure of that. Kaizome pulled a cigarette from his pocket and lit it with his All Might-themed lighter, waiting by Midoriya's house for him to get here. It wouldn't take long, he got here around the same time every day, after trying to get his friend to leave him alone. He could see him right now, in fact. He could never miss that green hair. Midoriya hurried over to him, looking tired and freshly bruised. Kaizome nearly scowled. His parents were supposed to be working and leaving him alone. Guess it had the opposite effect. Come on Midoriya, we've got work to do. He turned without waiting to see if his apprentice was following and headed straight for Dagoba Beach. Once there Midoriya would spend an hour or two just hauling trash, and then Stain would train him how to fight and wield a weapon. As they reached the beach Midoriya spotted Stain's truck already there. Stain quickly scaled a tall pile of trash and perched over it. He watched as the boy got to work, hauling a TV bigger than him to his truck. After they finished training today, he'd drop off all the trash to a trash depot. He spent the next hour rummaging through Midoriya's bag board. He came across the sketchbook and flipped through the pages. This particular one was completely full and he spent a whole 20 minutes admiring all the demonic drawings and rare drawings of his friend and random scenery. After he satisfied himself by snooping through his art, Stain came across the quirk analysis book. He read it cover to cover, amazed by how detailed and accurate the journal seemed to be about all the quirks listed. Stain watched as Midoriya cleared away more and more piles of trash. He was making quite the dent in all this trash, and maybe it was possible to get all of it cleared away before the entrance exam. It had been a month since he started training him, and he could already see a difference in the boy's muscle mass. He watched for another hour or so before he jumped off the pile he'd been sitting on. Midoriya stopped immediately and watched blankly as Stain approached. Stain drew a katana from its sheath and turned the blade towards himself, the handle pointed in Midoriya's direction. Midoriya took the blade easily and shifted into a fighting stance that Stain ingrained in his head during the first week. Stain was an impatient person and struck first fast and strong. The sound of metal scraping against metal rang in his ears as Midoriya parried easily. Quickly the fight commenced, faster than Stain's eyes could follow. He let instinct take the wheel as sparks flew between the two swords that kept meeting. Each blow was met with a counterattack, and Stain was proud to say that Midoriya had been doing well in his training. He had started out with close combat training, drilling offensive moves and defensive moves into Midoriya for the entire first month. He was building muscle and becoming stronger now, so they'd moved on to training with weapons. He was really good with a sword, and Stain could see Midoriya surpassing him soon enough. Between blows, when Stain and Midoriya jumped apart, he decided to ask his apprentice something. Why do you want to be a hero? He knew if he wanted an answer he'd have to give Midoriya a minute to grab a pen and paper. He lowered his weapon and allowed his pupil to grab both and jot down an answer. So I can have meaning. Honestly, it was a depressing answer that hit Stain right in the heart. He knew how it felt to have no meaning in life. He'd once been in the same situation as Midoriya found himself in. Except Stain never found a mentor to help him and point him in the right direction. As a result, he came to hate heroes and even ended up killing them and making a name for himself as the hero killer. Midoriya was lucky Stain took an interest in him and decided to teach him how to save himself. Stain was lucky too. He was doing something good by helping someone as lost and as hurt as Midoriya. Their swords clashed together, and Stain's pocket buzzed. He ignored it for now but knew he should probably answer it. Midoriya gave him a raised eyebrow and a slight grin. It's just a message. Keep going. The scream of the weapons scraping against each other nearly drowned out his ringtone. His phone buzzed loudly and he sighed in annoyance. Hold on, go practice your form really fast. He grabbed his phone out of his pocket and answered it. What do you want? I'm in the middle of something. Oh, nothing in particular, a deep grainy voice answered. I just have a job I need someone to get done for me tonight. Everyone I've assigned this task to is reluctant. What did you have in mind? Stain asked, watching Midoriya as he went through different kinds of forms with the sword like he was a samurai or something. You should be holding the sword with one hand, not two. Midoriya glared at him, and Stain nearly snorted. Who are you talking to, Stain? Do you have an apprentice now? No, I don't, Stain snapped quickly. What's the job you have for me? I need someone to transport weapons to the League of Villains. Your little project with that crazy kid with a bunch of hands on his face? No wonder no one wanted to do it. Stain picked at his gnarly nails. Yes, I'm well aware of how immature Shigaraki can be, but I do need someone to transport these weapons for me. Seeing as my headquarters of operation is far from the League. You could even take that apprentice you don't have with you. I have a new sword that might fit him well if you introduce me to him. I don't think he'd like that. Bring him to Stain. You know our deal. If you don't do what I say then. Find out, but you can't keep him. I wouldn't dream of taking him from you, the man rasped. The last one was sufficient enough even though he didn't last too long. Stain sighed as the call ended. Izuku was having a rough week. He had a little less than 2 months to get strong enough to make it into Yui's hero course, and Stain was training him harder than Izuku thought was possible. He could see himself gaining more muscles, and his fast reflexes saved him from more than a few nicks from Stain's crazy intense sword training. His classes were easy enough, but it was his parents and his training that made his week difficult. Hisashi and Inko seemed to be more angry than usual, and they never got home until really late at night. Hisashi would always wake him up, drunk and stupid with anger. Then Hisashi would tell at him all night and beat the shit out of him before heading to bed. And by then, Izuku would be wide awake and in pain until he had to go to school. It was a never-ending cycle of being absolutely bone-tired and done with everything. He'd rather sleep in his room all day than go to school or do anything. The clock on his phone read 3 a.m., and he could hear his mother and father yelling at each other before a door slammed. Stupid Psycho Beach! Hisashi shouted, probably strolling into the kitchen for a beer. A few seconds later, Izuku heard the door to his own bedroom open slowly. Anxiety clung to him like a thick blanket as Hisashi stumbled down the rickety wooden stairs. This was quickly becoming a nightly affair with his father. Come home from work, yell at your wife, grab a drink and get drunk, beat up your son for no goddamn reason, and then give him quirk suppressants. Izuku clutched his sheets tightly between his fingers, and those familiar white eyes winked out of existence. The demons were afraid of Hisashi, for a good reason. With that kind of quirk, interrogating would be the best kind of job for him. Or maybe he should become a professional at torturing people. He was beginning to realize he should be very afraid every time Hisashi came into his dark room. His father reached the end of the stairs, cursing loudly to himself. "Ain't dark as hell in here." Izuku held his breath, refusing to make any noise whatsoever as Hisashi tripped over his own feet trying to find Izuku, who was sitting up in his bed, knuckles white from gripping his bed sheets too tightly. His breath came in shallow and hurried. He knew exactly how this would go. It was never quick, or at least it never felt that way. When in pain, seconds can become hours in one's mind. He was positive that Hisashi could hear his heart pounding in his chest from all the way across the room. It was like being thrown into snow without clothes. Ice pumped through his veins, burning and freezing at the same time as Hisashi took a seat on the edge of Izuku's bed. The bed creaked with the added weight, and Izuku pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around himself. The two were silent for a while as Hisashi took long swigs from his beer. He slurred his words together, mostly complaining about work and his mother. Izuku ignored him for the most part, as most of his words became unintelligible. Just then Hisashi's hand came up to cup his cheek, and Izuku jumped back as white-hot pain exploded in his jaw. "That I really hate you," Hisashi declared. "You're useless, you know that, right?" Izuku wasn't listening as he watched Hisashi's hands whip around as he spoke. The inevitable pain and panic would come, and it was always terrifying. The yelling that followed was crushing and depressing too. Hisashi placed his hand on the back of Izuku's neck, and they were nearly nose to nose. Suddenly Izuku wished he couldn't see anything. It was better than seeing Hisashi up this close. "You're the worst thing that's ever been born. I don't know why I deal with you, and that quirk of yours." Izuku's world was nothing but searing hot pain and cold fear and panic. Every cell in his body was screaming in pain, and he could feel himself tensing up against his will as his mind developed tunnel vision, registering over and over the freezing cold on his neck where Hisashi touched him. His teeth snapped together in his mouth loudly, and sharp pain skittered down his spine. His nails dug themselves into the soft skin on his neck, until warm sticky blood dripped from the crescent moon-shaped cuts. Hisashi made no sign of moving, and Izuku tore at his lips with his teeth in his frenzy of pain. "His breath is loud and labored now," bad Hisashi laughs lowly at him. "I'm thinking." Hisashi whispers, his hand petting Izuku's neck. His smile was dark and sinister. Crashing waves of agony seized him over and over. "Maybe my boss could help with that." Izuku's hands ringed together, tangling with his blanket. "Would you like that?" Izuku nodded his head slightly, shaking. Hisashi stood quickly and scowled at him from what he could see in this pitch-black darkness. He almost gasped in relief as the pain dulled. "Good," he snapped, grabbing his beer on the way out of his room. "Don't forget to take the pills." Izuku slumped in his bed, tears already obscuring his view as those white eyes reappeared around him. He covered himself head to toe in his bedsheets and squeezed his eyes shut, trying to breathe normally again. His heart was beating so loudly in his chest he thought it might explode. His body trembled and he couldn't get it to stop. His body throbbed in time with his heart, burning and cold at the same time from the aftereffect of his father's nasty quirk. His quirk always left bruises where he touched him, a light blue and purple like a galaxy against his skin. It was easily dismissed as him being accident-prone and clumsy. His teachers never questioned it, but Kaken was harder to fool. Izuku rubbed his hands up and down his arms, trying to dispel the goosebumps that ended up appearing. He was almost glad that Kaizomi-san didn't end up training him today, informing him by a simple text to head straight home after school. His body was finally catching up to his mind, exhausted and burnt out. Kaizomi could probably tell, and maybe that's why they didn't train today. He was wrong, and he realized that as soon as he tried to head to school the next day. Hisashi was always at work around this time, but today he was sitting at the dining room table that Izuku never had the luxury to sit at. Izuku glanced at him uneasily. "Izuku," Hisashi grumbled very quietly, "you're not going to school today, put your bag away. We're going somewhere." Izuku's anxiety spiked immediately, and he opened his bedroom door slightly and chucked his bag into the darkness. It landed with a quiet thump, and he closed the door again. "Your mother's almost ready, let's go." He didn't like this at all. This wasn't something that Hisashi has ever done before, and he didn't have a good feeling about it. Hisashi looked all too happy as his mother, Inko, finally emerged from the bathroom. Her hair was up in a sophisticated bun, and she gave Izuku an icy glare as she applied the last of her mascara. Izuku shrunk back, wanting nothing more than to go back to being completely ignored. He'd even be okay with a few dirty words slung at him as he headed to school. He didn't want to go wherever they wanted him to go. The demons that usually followed him weren't grinning at him like they usually did. They were mumbling warnings. "No. Evil. Run." Izuku felt sick to his stomach as Hisashi stood up and handed him a small pill. "Take this and then we'll go." He knew what it was and swallowed it swiftly. The demons before him turned into smoke clouds, still visible but hard to catch if he wasn't paying attention. It seemed as if the quirk suppressants Hisashi was giving him were already too weak. He'd already built up a tolerance. He hated it and he wanted his quirk completely gone. Maybe that's where they were going? A sudden flicker of hope came to life in his chest. Maybe he could finally become quirkless. The three of them left the house quickly, and Izuku felt a faint buzz of hope go down his spine. It was warm and fuzzy, unlike the world outside. It was strange. It was supposed to be a really hot day today, but it was almost cold and the sky was gray and cloudy. Izuku nearly yelped when he spotted Kaizomi-sen, who glanced at him in shock. "Why, Stain, nice to see you here," Inko said in mock cheer. "I didn't know you were meeting the boss today too." Kaizomi-san didn't take his eyes off of Izuku, and Izuku pretended to ignore him. "This your kid?" he asked lowly. "Oh, don't mind him. He's pretty useless, I'm taking him to meet him. Hopefully he can fix Izuku." Kaizomi's eyes flashed with alarm and concern as they began to walk. Izuku's phone buzzed in his pocket and he ignored it. Inko gave him a sharp, burning glare that made him hold his breath. They walked in the opposite direction of his school and he was relieved that Kaken wasn't at the house already waiting for him. It would be difficult to explain exactly what was happening. Truthfully, he didn't even understand anything going on right now. All he knew was that this felt wrong. Every fiber of his being was screaming at him to leave. Against his better judgment, he ignored his instincts and followed his mother, father and mentor as they veered into an alleyway that Izuku had never ventured into before. It was littered with trash and covered in bright eye-catching graffiti. There were a few concerning-looking puddles. It could be PSS or just water. But from the acrid smell he had to assume it was piss. He stepped over it carefully. A little ways away, at the dead end of the alley, was something that looked like a portal. Kaizomi-san strode into it with his shoulders tense. Izuku was shocked. Teleportation quirks were extremely rare and limited. Wherever they were going, it had to be nearby. That was the one rule about quirks like this one: they had to know the exact coordinates and they needed to be somewhat close. Anyway, he watched as Hisashi and Inko went into the portal. He hesitated and glanced behind him. He could use this moment to run, but then his parents would just try it again. So he ducked his head slightly and entered the portal. The world darkened and it felt like he was on a roller coaster, dropping at 1,000,000 miles an hour before the world materialized again. There were no demons wherever he was. It was dark in this room, and the only light was from tubes in the walls and floor. They were interconnected and almost looked like a blue glow-in-the-dark maze. Whatever substance was in those tubes also fed into large cylinder tanks. Floating inside those lightly glowing tanks were bird-like monsters, and they all seemed to be sleeping at the moment, and Izuku hoped they'd stay that way. He was nearly entranced by the monsters resting inside those tubes until one of them opened their eyes to stare at him. They were wild and terrified like a caged animal. They were so pained and human that Izuku felt like throwing up. Those weren't monsters. Those were people. They were practically screaming at him to rescue them. His heart ached for them, but he knew he couldn't do anything. His eyes traveled around the dark room, catching Kaizomi-san's eye, and the killer took a few steps closer to whisper in his ear while Hisashi and Inko walked forward. It was then that he noticed the huge chair farthest from him. "Don't PSS him off. Be careful." Izuku nodded slightly and Kaizomi-san left him to stride forward toward that chair. Izuku followed reluctantly, feeling dread drown him in a crashing wave. Whoever was in that chair was not someone he wanted to mess with. He startled when a deep voice sounded. "Ah, is this your son Hisashi?" "Inko." Izuku froze to his spot. Fear seized every muscle in his body. This was true terror, making him break out in a sweat almost immediately as the man in the chair shifted. He noticed how that man wore a suit and had an air about him that made Izuku feel as if he was facing a tyrannical king of the villains. A king who had no problem executing Izuku on the spot with his bare hands. "Come closer, my boy," the boy said gruffly, and Izuku spotted his huge scarred hand. He gulped thickly and took a shaky step forward, weak at the knees with anxiety. He stopped a good ways away from that chair, and he waited, his breathing heavy and loud in the silence that followed. The strange man let out an annoyed sigh and Izuku grimaced. The man stood, and Izuku's breath hitched. The man's face was half melted, skin stretched over where his eyes should have been. Tubes protruded from his face, and his smile was sinister and horrifying. He ducked away, eyes averted as the man walked the rest of the way to him. Izuku Midoriya, Stain's protege, and son to my second-in-command, Hisashi. Your father has told me you want your quirk removed. Izuku was too frozen to move. He held out a hand and Izuku didn't move to shake it. The stranger smiled gently at him, but in the darkness it didn't look convincing at all. Shall we begin with introductions then? I already know so you are, and it's only right you know who I am. I am the first man in history to get a quirk. I've been alive for a very, very long time that I am known only by a few, namely All Might. You could say I'm the supervillain who almost tore All Might in half. Izuku was going to throw up everywhere. For someone to almost kill All Might, that he could feel his heartbeat thunder in his chest. His body was frozen, and his breath was hurried and frantic with horror. I am All for One. Wait, don't! Stain shouted, but All for One just grinned like a maniac. Before Izuku could blink, All for One grabbed both of his hands and something in him tore itself to shreds. It was like everything was getting SCD out of him, and something vital was trying to escape. His vision flashed a blinding white, but as suddenly as it began it stopped, and Izuku fell to his knees and threw up everywhere. Every muscle screamed in agony, and reflex tears sprung to his eyes as he emptied his stomach again. All for One grabbed him by a handful of his hair and shook him, scowling. Why? There was a tiny hint of fear in his voice. Why can't I take it from you? Izuku shook his head in confusion. He didn't know. He didn't know. How was he supposed to know? Stand up, Izuku, All for One snaps, but he didn't wait for him to stand, he dragged him to his feet, hissing obscenities. Why? All for One mumbled again, moving Izuku's head this way and that, glowering. What exactly is your quirk? Izuku looked at him hopelessly, but something strange happened. Where All for One's eyes were supposed to be was a flashing golden glow, and his eyes widened in realization. I see that what a beautifully intriguing quirk you have, Izuku Midoriya. I think I like you. Would you mind if I do an experiment? Of course you don't mind, my boy. Stain stiffened and watched warily. All for One took a hold of his hands again, and Izuku fought the urge to pull away and almost didn't stifle the reflexive hiss when their hands intertwined. He didn't like the way All for One's grip tightened and how he smiled at him darkly. All for One. Please, Stain muttered weakly. Shut up, Diamante. Hisashi glared at Stain and crossed his arms, sick satisfaction obvious in his expression. Izuku turned his wide eyes to All for One, and that's when it happened. He heard the cracking and smelled the iron smell of blood before the pain hit him. It was like getting hit by a freight train again and again. His breath was caught in his throat as he stared at his bloodied and crushed hands. The bone peeked through the gashes. He realized the screaming he heard was his own, as blood squirted out of his completely destroyed hands. Large deep cuts littered his arms, but he didn't care about that. His hands on their hand were unrecognizable and mutilated. Izuku didn't register anything happening around him. His hands. His hands. I smell blood. Warm blood covered everything. It was everywhere and his vision was red with it. Pain pulsed worse and worse with each passing second as All for One laughed, the cracking noise getting louder and more sickeningly wet. Stop, Stain snapped, over Izuku's own excruciating screams as every bone in his hand broke again. Please stop. All right, I guess I'll leave him in decent condition for now, All for One relented. For a long time it was silent, and Izuku clutched his mutilated hands to his chest. Be grateful, Izuku Midoriya. Stain may be able to train you in different types of combat, but I can teach you to use your quirk. Izuku didn't care about that. He wasn't registering anything All for One was even saying. He was too busy riding through the pain of having his hands destroyed, thanks. He whined weakly as someone grabbed him by the shoulders and brought him to his feet. Let's go get you fixed up. That's all he heard before the world went dark, and he was conscious no more. It was bright when he woke up. It smelled strongly of rubbing alcohol and Izuku let out a groan of confusion. He opened his eyes and squeezed them shut almost as soon as he opened them. It was too bright. Then last night's events hit him like a bus. His eyes snapped on and he sat up instantly, breathing heavy and sweating in terror. "Whoa, take it slow, idiot," Kaizomi-san grumbled, sounding alarmed and worried. No one except Kaken and Auntie Mitsuki ever seemed too worried for him. "You shouldn't be moving." Kaizomi stopped and glanced guiltily as he spotted Izuku's tears dripping down his cheeks. Izuku was laying down on a couch and Stain joined him, perched on the edge with his back hunched. Hey, it's okay, you're okay, shit, I don't know how to comfort kids, Jesus." Izuku looked at his heavily bandaged hands and arms. The bandages stopped right at his elbows. The occasional gauze pad was taped to his shoulder and some were on his back, pulling at his skin slightly. Stain looked away, his eyes swimming with regret and sadness. "I'm sorry. I didn't think he'd do that to you. I fixed you up as good as I could, but your hands at the bones are very delicate and I'm no doctor. Why, you probably have nerve damage and they'll look deformed. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Izuku pursed his lips together. "He wants you back next week after school too," Stain admitted, looking livid. "I tried to convince him otherwise, but he was too interested in your quirk. I'll be there the entire time, and I won't let him do that to you again. I swear to God I'll kill him." Izuku smiled weakly, and his lips trembled. Stain left without a word, only to return with a drink of water with a straw in it and 2 small pills. Stain didn't hand them to him, and he was grateful, but he eyed the pills in suspicion. "Just painkillers, you paranoid butt," Stain told him. Izuku smiled at him weakly, and Stain set the drink and pills down for a moment. "Do your arms hurt?" He nodded mutely. The pain wasn't overwhelming, he hadn't tried to use his hands yet, so he was fine for now. Stain went back into his kitchen, reemerging with 2 ice packs. He placed each one in Izuku's hands, but the added weight ignited the sleeping pain within his skin. But at the same time, he relished in the soothing cold that the ice packs provided. "You really look like sheet," Stain sighed to himself. "It pisses me off that I couldn't do anything against him while he hurt you like that. You're my apprentice, you're supposed to depend on me to protect you from people like him. Then, I can't even help you get out of that FNG house where they lock you in pitch black a basement every day." Izuku shrugged, trying to convey silently that it was fine, and he wasn't dead, so that was always a plus. Kaizomi seemed to get it, but he still seemed immensely guilty. Izuku felt really bad, but it really wasn't Kaizomi-san's fault. Izuku wouldn't stand up to someone like that either. All for One was absolutely terrifying, and his parents were too. Stain let out a heavy sigh and grabbed the pills and drink from the table he set them on. Even though Izuku hated the idea of it, he let Stain pop the pills in his mouth and give him a drink. Yeah, his arms may be broken beyond repair, but he didn't want to be treated like glass that's already shattered into a million pieces. "Don't give me that look," Stain groaned. "Your arms are broken, you can't do shit. Maybe I could call in a favor to speed it up." Izuku tilted his head to the side, confused. Stain elaborated quickly. "I know someone at Yui who could heal your hands a little bit. She's a stickler though, about using her quirk. Hopefully she can heal it almost completely, but if she can't you probably won't pass the entrance exam. I don't even think I'd let you take it, with what condition your hands are in right now." Kaizomi liked at his lips absently, looking sadder by the second. "You'll have to deal with it for a while though, considering her quirk uses your stamina to work. Right now you must be exhausted." Izuku glared down at his hands, self-loathing already springing to life in his heart. "You have 2 months to allow yourself to heal before the entrance exam. Hopefully, my friend can help you heal enough to do well. Honestly, injuries as serious as this should have put you in the hospital with all the best healing quirk heroes for a month, but we both know what would happen if we went to the hospital." The thought of pissing off All for One made him feel seriously sick. Stain pursed his lips together. "I'll give my friend a call and see if she can do anything." Izuku leaned back into the couch and stared at the wooden flooring. Feeling down, he watched as Kaizomi leave the room to make a call. His heart ached dully in his chest, and he didn't notice the small animal dash in from where Kaizomi went and fly onto the couch. He only noticed because something plopped down right on his chest and barked loudly at him. Izuku stared blankly at the tiny pug wagging its curly tail at him a million miles a second. He barked at him again, and Army crawled up Izuku's chest and nudged at his face. He laughed softly, coughing at the itch in his throat. Edgar, don't f with him. The dog stood up on all fours and turned toward where Izuku heard Stain yell. The pug howled before turning back to Izuku and plopping right back down. Edgar nudged at Izuku's injured hands, and he shifted one of his hands up from under the ice pack and brought it up to pet Edgar. He smiled softly as that curly tail whipped around eagerly. Moving his hand around like this hurt like a motherfucker, but he'd never had the chance to pet a dog before. Edgar closed his eyes and within seconds the pug was snoring against his chest. The dog was warm, almost like a living heating pad. Izuku could feel himself drifting off and didn't mind. He wasn't that close with Stain yet, but if this man had a dog like Edgar, how bad could he really be? It was strange, finally feeling comfortable enough to sleep in a house that wasn't Kaken's. He was out like a light before he even realized it. Recovery Girl has been friends with Kaizome, a Yui dropout, for a very long time. The man was always sporting a hoodie and baggy jeans and had a thuggish look to him. Chio was old enough to know that Kaizome was a kind-hearted civilian with a heart for heroism. That's why when he called her about an injured boy, she wasn't surprised. She was alarmed, yes, but she was used to calls like this from almost everyone she knew. So she made her way to his apartment in the ghetto part of town and knocked on the door at the dead of night. She'd had a long day at work today and only managed to get enough free time to help Kaizome out. Kaizome opened the door, eyes red and droopy with exhaustion. Chio smiles at him. Where's the boy? Right in here, and he's sleeping right now. He's a pretty jumpy kid, so try not to wake him up, Kaizome grumbled, looking more agitated than he usually was. Chio gave him a soft pat on the shoulder. He'll be fine, I can heal almost anything. I'm not so sure you can this time, Chio, but I decided I could try contacting you first. Kaizome led her to a couch where a small kid who didn't look a little over 13 she observes was sleeping. Edgar, Kaizome's dog, has apparently taken a liking to the boy and is sleeping right on his chest. Kaizome shooed the small pug away and nudged the small boy on the couch awake. Chio watched as the boy opened his eyes instantly and locked eyes with her. She could see the primal fear in those green eyes. She could practically feel the pain and panic that radiated off of him. It made her heart ache, but the way he cradled his hands to his chest and flinched when she took a step forward was a cause for concern. She tried to placate him immediately. I'm here to see if I can heal your hands, is that okay? The boy bit at his lips, and Chio waited for him to speak or nod. She got neither as the boy just ducked his head away and held out two shaking hands. Chio took one hand and unraveled the abundant amount of pink-stained bandages. At first, she wasn't too worried until Kaizome turned on a light, and she twisted his hand slightly. The bruises and swelling were more obvious with the more lighting, and she flinched when the boy snatched his hand away, gasping in agony. It's his hands, Kaizome told her. Every bone is completely shattered. Can you do anything? I would need to do some x-rays, Chio told him. He needs plenty of rest, but I can reduce his swelling and bruising. You should keep him out of school for a while. I agree, Kaizome grumbled. I've already called his school and everything to let them know he'll be gone for a while. When can we get those x-rays done? Chio brought up a hand so she could slide her chin in thought. She could easily manage to do it really early in the morning. She would have to take this boy to the Yui infirmary really early in the morning, but she could squeeze him in the end. That's all that mattered. Tomorrow morning, if you can get up early enough for it, she replied. Kaizome nodded mutely. As soon as possible would be best, we'll make it. Thank you, Chio-san. Don't thank me, it's my job to help people, Chio told him, patting the boy timid teen on the hand before releasing him. She turned to the small teenager before her. Who are you? The boy didn't say anything at all, as Chio stared at him. He did shuffle slightly and look at everything but her. The silence became concerning very quickly. He's mute, Kaizome told her reassuringly. He won't answer you, and he doesn't know sign language. Why would he not know sign language if he was mute? That isn't our business, now is it? Kaizome mumbled solemnly. How early do you want us there tomorrow? Chio shrugged. 5 a.m. should suffice. I don't think anyone at Yui will need the nurse that early in the morning. We'll do some x-rays and I'll see if I can't heal him a bit more. She leaned forward into the small boy's space and kissed his forehead. A look of confusion passed across the teenager's face before it was effectively masked and Chio smiled gently at him and let Kaizome lead her out the door. The two of them stood in the doorway, and Chio glared at him. Well, Kaizome grimaced. His name is Izuku Midoriya, there's not much else I know about him. From what I saw, his injuries are quite severe. How did he manage to get hurt that badly? I've never seen wounds like that. We'll talk about that tomorrow. You really need to stop dodging my questions, Kaizome. I always figure it out eventually, Chio told him rather firmly. She looked in those hurricane-like eyes, and too many emotions were swirling in Kaizome's eyes. Only one overpowered the others, and it was unease. She knew Kaizome was involved in something, but what it was still seemed to evade her no matter how much she looked into it. She was a hero, and Chio should be able to tell what was happening to Kaizome and Midoriya. It was something dangerous, that much she knew. Chio wasn't going to let Kaizome fall into the darkest depths without trying to save him. What kind of hero would she be if she allowed something like that? We'll see you tomorrow. And you'll be answering some of my questions? She didn't get a response, so she turned to leave. She'd be lying if she said she didn't glance behind her ever so often, feeling as if someone was watching her. She definitely didn't miss the civilians glaring at her from the corner of her eyes. Whoever Kaizome was involved with, the man had a very long reach. Shoyuta Aizawa was effectively getting a headache from this staff meeting and present mic. He was married to this man, but it didn't help to quell his annoyance whenever he got too loud. Hizashi was smiling big and talking adamantly with Principal Nedzu about the new art program they just put funding into. Now it was no longer a course at Yui just for show. Now present Mike would get a chance to teach his favorite subject besides heroics. I think it's a perfect addition to Yui, Nedzu told them all. Hero, support and general courses do ask a lot of our students. Art could prove to be a relaxing class for every student, but it could also be a whole course on its own aside from our other studies. We could be the first hero academy with a successful art studies program, could you imagine? Hell yeah. Present Mike screeched loudly, puffing out his chest. I just love art. Truly a beautiful and masterful addition to our school indeed. Now, while we're on the topic, I would like to add that Yui will be putting more consideration into our art scholarships. In the past, art scholarships were essentially useless, but they did look good on resumes for general education students looking for jobs after graduation. Nedzu spread his arms wide. Now only one art scholarship will be given out a year, and we will pay their tuition in full for their entire high school career. Art has never had much appreciation in our world, and art-related quirks are far and in between these days. I think it's important for the world to stop and enjoy a masterpiece every once in a while. I totally agree. Shoyuta rolled his eyes, his agitation growing with his pounding head. He was glad Present Mick's dream of an art course was finally being implemented, but he really needed some painkillers right now. He wanted this meeting to end, and he desperately needed a nap and maybe a quick talk with Nedzu about the entrance exam. He put his head against the table and tried his damnedest to ignore Nedzu's long-winded speech about a new school year. Was he practicing his speech for the entrance ceremony or something? Of course, this year we will be having a new teacher joining us, as all of you are sure to be aware. He'll be taking over Present Mick's job as the heroics teacher because our art program now requires a full-time teacher to be successful. This new teacher is none other than the #1 hero, All Might. Shoyuta yawned, watching Yagi Toshinori out of the corner of his eye. No one in the world was aware of Toshinori's weakened state except for maybe Recovery Girl, but as of this year, all Yui teachers had become notified of it. Aizawa was surprised, of course, but it explained a lot about All Might's recent change in his hero schedule. Nedzu was still talking now, as soon as Yagi took a seat. Let's have a great school year, everyone. Go ahead and continue preparations for the upcoming entrance exam. Shoyuta almost cried when he finally got to leave and head to Recovery Girl's office. It was barely 5 in the FNG morning, and he still had a whole day to go through. He definitely needed Recovery Girl's magic touch for the shitty day he was about to have. He weaved his way through the vacant Yui hallways. Everyone else was headed to the support department, helping out with the robots, so Shoyuta was blissfully alone for now. As Recovery Girl's office came into view, he heard voices. 2 to be exact, and one was Recovery Girl. He wasn't one to eavesdrop, but what they were saying was pretty interesting. Injuries like that since All Might. Shoyuta stopped and leaned against the wall near her door, but far away enough to escape. How did his hands get hurt this bad, Kaizome? The type of nerve damage. And the joints in his hands are completely destroyed beyond repair. His bones will heal in a few months, with careful care. The nerve damage, unfortunately, can never be repaired either. His hands might shake a lot, but that's to be expected with this kind of injury. It's almost as if a bomb went off on his hands. Okay, maybe Shoyuta shouldn't be listening to this. It wasn't his business, but he was curious it. That's why he didn't move. He knew himself well, and if he left now without the whole story, he'd wonder about it all day. I really can't tell you, Chio-san. At least tell me why his hands are cut up in the shape of a summoning circle? What happened to him? Where have you been for the past month and a half? Recovery Girl sounded pained and worried. It was just like her, to worry too much about her patients. I can't heal him, and I can't prevent any scarring. I can't do anything for him, Kaizome, not if you don't tell me what the F you've got yourself into. Stop worrying too much, old lady, Kaizome grumbled roughly, but endearingly. I want to help you. If you can't heal him, you can't help, Kaizome told her, but that's okay, we can go to someone else. Everyone else will say the same thing, Recovery Girl replied, and Shoyuta took his chance. He wanted to see who these two were talking about. And he wanted painkillers, or a kiss from Recovery Girl to make his migraine disappear in an instant. Plus, it sounded like this conversation was getting too emotional for Recovery Girl to handle. He made his steps audible and rounded the corner and into her office in a split second. Recovery Girl glared at him, and this Kaizome guy who looked like a thug. Shoyuta waved half-heartedly and ventured deeper into her room. I need painkillers for a headache, sorry. He wasn't sorry. He just wanted a glimpse of the boy they were talking about. He rummaged through her medicine cabinet and grabbed the correct bottle labeled painkillers and took an experimental glance toward the back of the room. His eyes went to his shaking hands. Bruised purple and blue, and a hue of alarming black. His palms were carved and slightly scabbed over, and Shoyuta blanked completely. The boy's fingers were slightly twisted and pointing in all the wrong directions. Aizawa's eyes couldn't help but stray to his carved-up arms, but then he made the massive mistake of locking eyes with dark emerald ones. The boy squeaked loudly and curled his hands into fists. Shoyuta winced with sympathy. It must be painful to move his hands at all. Kaizome seemed to think so too. Come on, Midoriya, and stop moving your hands. You'll hurt yourself. The boy Midoriya stood quickly, and Kaizome took a bunch of bandages and quickly wrapped his hands. See you around, Recovery Girl. Then they left, and Shoyuta glanced at Recovery Girl in confusion. Who are they? Eraserhead, you know all of my patients' identities are confidential. I feel like I've seen him somewhere before. The man. No. Midoriya. Kaizome didn't want to do this. He didn't want to grovel for help and make Izuku owe them. He never thought his apprentice would already be dragged into this sheet so soon. He'd thought he'd had time to warn him, or at least get him in Yui and leave him to become a hero on his own. He never wanted Izuku involved with All for One, and he didn't want Izuku to owe this man something. Sadly, they had no choice. Izuku still had his heart set on becoming a hero, and Kaizome was determined to help him no matter what. Even if that meant he sent Izuku to get his hands healed by a crazy doctor by the name of Tsubasa. Alright, Midoriya, I know for a fact you never want to go back to All for One, but we don't really have a choice here. To be able to compete in the entrance exam, you need your hands mostly healed so we can resume our training. Understand? He got the smallest of nods from his teenage apprentice, and they stepped into the nearest alleyway. The warp was already waiting, inky black and bubbling. Kaizome stepped inside first, and he heard his apprentice sigh shortly in distress. He didn't blame him, as the two of them ended up in the familiar dark room lit only by the tubes with a blue substance in it. Each tube connected to a single Nomu tank, and standing right in front of one was Dr. Tsubasa, looking eerily excited to lay eyes on Izuku as soon as they entered the room. The chair on the other side of the room was mercifully empty for now, and Dr. Tsubasa seemed to be the only one in the room. Izuku visibly shrunk as soon as the doctor strode toward him. "Ah, you must be Midoriya, am I right?" He didn't wait for a response, before turning on his heel and motioning for Izuku to follow. He glanced at Kaizome and smiled slightly. "He'll be out for you in a moment, Stain." Kaizome glared at Tsubasa furiously. What did All for One want, and why wasn't he allowed to be with his apprentice while his hands were healed? It put him on edge as he stood, waiting. He must have waited a solid 10 minutes before anyone showed up. It turned out to be just Hisashi, and Stain glared at him, sporting a rather vicious scowl. "All for One's a little busy right now, but he did want me to remind you of the job he gave you. Delivering some weapons, right? Is that all?" Stain asked, crossing his arms. "Yes, but he does want to speak to your apprentice afterward. He wants you to bring him on the job with you too." "Show me where the weapons are and I'll get them delivered right away," Stain told him, and Hisashi turned and went in the same direction his apprentice just disappeared through. Stain followed, always cautious in the presence of Hisashi, Inko, or All for One. He passed by Dr. Tsubasa's room and caught only a glimpse of his apprentice, but he heard no screaming, so he should be fine for now. Hisashi turned the corner and opened the door to a well-lit room. It was a garage filled with unsuspecting vehicles, but only one of them was loaded with something as far as he could tell. It was a pickup truck with logs in the bed of it, and Hisashi directed him to it and handed him a pair of keys. "Under all of this are the weapons we need delivered to a villain named Bullseye. He requested these weapons specifically a few weeks ago, and we had them custom made for him. There's a phone in there already prepared with GPS directions, and he should be there by the time you get there. He already knows you're the one dropping off the goods. After you finish with Bullies d'Elvoi, the rest of the goods will go to the League. Both locations are on the GPS. After both deliveries are completed, All for One would like to speak to you and your kid." "My kid?" Stain snapped, annoyed. He was set off that Hisashi kept ignoring the fact that Midoriya was biologically his son. What an a-hole. He's actually your kid, and you're allowing this to happen to him? You're allowing Inko to treat him the way she is? "I'm not allowing anything. I've been the one telling her to do that, and now that I live there I get to do it myself." "Abuse your son? What the hell is wrong with you?" "Nothing's wrong with me," Hisashi told him. "The boy's birth was a mistake. Inko's PRDNPI was a mistake. He wasn't supposed to be born, and he needs to know that." "Ahem," came a raspy voice, and Stain jumped. Dr. Tsubasa was standing nearby, and Midoriya was standing next to him, face carefully blank and emotionless. "His hands are functional now, but I couldn't heal the cuts and nerve damage. The cuts should scab over and heal, but it'll scar pretty badly. His hands will shake uncontrollably, but it could probably be helped with therapy, not that he'll get it. He owes us, Stain, don't forget." Dr. Tsubasa left immediately. "In the car, my boy," Hisashi mumbled, and Midoriya didn't hesitate, but he didn't spare his father a glance. Stain opened the driver's side door and jammed the key into the ignition, and the car roared to life. On the other side of the room was a massive dark tunnel that would take them up into the city. He directed the car toward it and glanced worryingly at his small apprentice. "Are you okay?" Stain asked as they entered the dark tunnel. He flipped on the headlights and glanced every so often at Midoriya, who nodded. "Hands are good." Another nod. The rest of the ride was composed of silence and the GPS shouting orders at them as they drove. Stain would like to say that Midoriya was being quieter than usual, but that would be a lie. The boy was mute after all and was always quiet. Today was no different, but he seemed even more depressed than usual, probably because of what his father said about him. It struck Stain somewhere deep to see Midoriya go through the same treatment Stain went through as a kid. He was determined to be that light in the darkness for this boy, though, even if he couldn't save him like he originally planned. They weaved through traffic, getting stopped at almost every stoplight in existence, and he could tell it was annoying Midoriya. At one of these stoplights they ended up stuck at, Stain decided to speak. "All for One wants to speak with you when we get back, but I'll be there the entire time, I promise. Last time he said he was interested in training you, And that's probably why he wants to talk, nothing more. Midoriya didn't acknowledge that he heard anything, but Stain knew he was listening. I'll try my best to keep you alive while he trains you, I promise. The light turned green, and Midoriya looked out the window. They were headed to the more suburban part of town and soon ended up at a small trailer where a rather buff man waited with his arms crossed and his expression fierce. Stain noticed the small garden of vegetables and fruits next to his small home. Stain got out of the car and so did his painfully small apprentice. Stain went to the back of the truck and managed to uncover the weapons and bring them out. Midoriya was busying himself by staring at the man before him. Hello, small boy. Midoriya waved, his face blank and bored. Bullseye smiled at him before turning to Stain. Do you have them? Why the hell would I be here if I didn't have them? Stain snapped, getting annoyed. Bullseye walked over and took each weapon from his hands, taking a second or two to analyze them. They look good, thanks. Whatever, I have places to be. See ya? Yeah, go running back like a good dog to your master. Bullseye grinned at him, and Stain flipped him off. Midoriya rolled his eyes and headed back to the truck, and leaned against it to watch Stain and Bullseye spit back and forth. You're an a-hole, says the boy who can't even protect their own apprentice from the big bad mastermind. That's just cruel. Don't get all mad that I switched organizations, Stain grumbled. You're the one that got effed over, not me. I mean, look at your apprentice, his hands are destroyed. He's fine. Oh really? You call that fine? He strode toward Midoriya, and the boy flinched when Bullseye lunged for his hand. With Midoriya's hand in his grasp, he dragged him toward Stain and unraveled the bandages around one of his hands. His eyes widened just a fraction, and he glared at Stain. Stain winced, as Midoriya hissed through his teeth when Bullseye twisted his hand just slightly. His hands are fing mutilated. What kind of teacher are you if you can't protect your students? I understand that your life before meeting me was a rough 20 years, but that's no excuse to let that happen to him. He jerked a finger toward Midoriya, and Stain felt his get heavy with sorrow and guilt. Bullseye was right, and Midoriya was suffering because Stain wasn't strong enough. You don't understand. Yes, I do. You've got yourself into a shitty situation and you're too deep to escape now. That boy isn't. Don't let him repeat your mistakes, Kaizome. Stain looked away, feeling like a failure. Midoriya snatched his hand away and flipped Bullseye off. He could see Midoriya's tense shoulders, and he could almost smell the fear rolling off him in waves, but he still flipped Stain's former mentor off. Stain was proud. He threw an arm around Midoriya's shoulders and guided him back to the truck. Leave us alone, and ask for someone else to deliver your DMN weapons. Fine, Bullseye grumbled as Stain slammed the car door shut. As soon as his apprentice put his seatbelt on, he pulled out of the driveway and headed to the next location marked on the GPS. He already knew the location of the League, and after a few seconds of listening to an automated voice yell out directions, he turned it off. Stain didn't try to fill the silence this time. He was boiling with rage, self-loathing, and guilt. It was his fault. All of this was. This time, though, he would make sure All for One didn't hurt him. Stain accelerated the car. He didn't want to take up too much time doing this job and make All for One mad. He'd much rather deal with an annoyed supervillain than an angry one. 15 minutes later, they stopped the truck at an abandoned building, but it wasn't really empty. It was an underground bar, only known by local villains. Inside this bar was the League of Villains. He parked the truck on the side of the road a little down the street from the bar, as to not draw attention to himself or his companion. The two of them left the truck and Stain walked around to the back of the truck where the rest of the weapons laid in duffel bags with a big L on the each. He handed one to Izuku and then shouldered the other two onto his back. This way, he mumbled, and Midoriya didn't hesitate to follow him as they walked toward the League of Villains. As they neared, someone opened the door and grinned at the two of them. Earlier than I expected, Jiren grumbled, his arms crossed. Can I have a look at them? No, but you can ask Shigaraki later, Stain told him, shoving past Jiren and into the building. He doesn't like it here. It's dark and cold, much like All for One's lair is. The bar they walk into is poorly lit and smells strongly of smoke to the point he feels like coughing up a lung. Izuku stays as close as he dares to Kaizomi-san the entire time as the two of them wait for this man named Shigaraki to arrive. It's pathetic how much anxiety is thrumming through his veins as he watches the entire room carefully. There's no one in here except for Kaizomi and him, but he still feels like he's being watched somehow. In fact, he's felt like this all day, but even more so right now. He takes a second to try to calm himself by taking everything in. The bar itself is well stocked with all types of drinks, and the bar stools look ripped up but otherwise still in good condition. Izuku's eyes keep locking onto the door that the man who was at the entrance went through. Before he'd left, he explained to Kaizomi-san that he would get Shigaraki, and that made Izuku practically vibrate with unease. If Shigaraki is anything like All for One, he wants absolutely nothing to do with him. Izuku swallows the lump in his throat as the door in front of them swings open to reveal a bizarre-looking man with hands all over his face. His pale blue hair is shocking, to say the least, and Izuku tries his hardest to pretend to be invisible as Shigaraki steps into the room. A whole crowd of demons trickle in after him, going straight for him, and Izuku has to resist the urge to run. They're tall, and not at all the friendliest-looking beasts he's ever laid eyes on. The temperature drops drastically in the room, but only Izuku seems to notice. The demons crowd around him, and he glares fiercely at them to move. Luckily they don't try to touch him or distract him, and they move away quickly once they meet his eye. Shigaraki takes the bags out of Stain's arms and then turns to Izuku. Izuku freezes up instantly at the glare he receives and holds out the bag heavy with guns and other weapons he kind of doesn't want to think about. Shigaraki takes it, clearly holding up a pinky. Izuku immediately recognizes the action and knows for a fact that his quirk is probably five-finger contact-oriented. It's highly probable that his quirk is also destructive to considering he was a villain. He really doesn't want Shigaraki to touch him. "Well," Shigaraki growls, "what are you still doing here? You finished the diamond job, now get out." With panic laying heavily in his gut, Izuku moves even before Kaizomi can. He's halfway to the truck when Kaizomi-san catches up, looking annoyed. For a moment worry seizes Izuku. Did he do something wrong? Is Kaizomi-san mad at him? The non-stop shaking in his hands increases tenfold, as Kaizomi's cold eyes go to him straight away. His mentor says nothing as he gets in the truck and it roars to life. In tense silence, or at least tense to Izuku, they drive back to that warehouse where All for One waited. He couldn't help but feel a wave of panic creep up on him as they enter the same dark tunnel they left from. He tries to push it down as they get out of the car and enter the same room he first met All for One in. It's still dark and cold and crowded. All for One's face points in his direction promptly and ignites a fire in his blood. Before he realizes it, All for One is across the room, holding him by his shoulders. A cruel smile pulls at this man's lips, and Izuku is already trembling and breathing heavily. "You made it back quicker than I thought. Did Shigaraki not give you any trouble?" It took a moment for Izuku to realize All for One wasn't talking to Kaizomi, but him. He opened his mouth slightly, but nothing came out. Panicking, he shook his head, and All for One grinned happily. "Good, I told him not to. You guys will have a formal introduction soon enough. Now on to more important business. The other day I told you about how I can train you to use your quirk." Izuku doesn't like where this is going and can feel himself slipping on the edge of a panic attack the longer those scarred hands rest on his shoulders. "I've taken quite the interest in you, young Midoriya. As a result, I want you here every Sunday all day long to train. Of course, you and Stain are welcome to continue your regular training every day except for Sundays if you wish. Though I will warn you that I do not recommend it. You'll be lucky if you can make it to school the next day." Izuku's heart nearly stops at that, and he finds himself trying to pull away as All for One's grip tightens. "I'll go easy on you for now, but my analysis quirk tells me you'll be very formidable if trained correctly. This quirk hasn't failed me yet, and I'm excited to see what you'll do under pressure." The nausea that hits him is enough to weaken him at the knees. The way his mouth twists into a smile made of knives and sick excitement only makes Izuku feel 10 times worse than he did before. Izuku isn't stupid, and he can feel himself sweating and hyperventilating. That kind of training would leave him unable to make it to school? What the if had he gotten himself into? "Now, my dear boy, I think you've already missed too much school. All for One brought a hand up to caress Izuku's cheek, and he's never felt so disgusted and terrified at the same time. A hero, All for One grabbed him by the jaw and tightened his grip until it was painful. His voice was sharp with venom and resentment. Izuku's muscles seized up, and his breathing stopped short. Should always prioritize education, don't you think? Izuku managed a short nod, and All for One released him. Izuku let out a relieved breath of air, only to be shoved by Hisashi, who he didn't even realize was there, into a black bubbling portal waiting for him. "It's time for you to go back home to your parents," All for One said. He's never been so petrified in his life, as the world disappears and he knows exactly where he's headed. These last 3 days aside from All for One have honestly been more relaxing than anything he's ever known. Kaizomi-san was nice to him. He helped him and got him healed even though it would hurt both of them in the long run when he didn't have to. So when he's moved down into that basement, he cried. His fear of the dark hits him like a tidal wave. It's colder and more unforgiving than he remembered, and it's so dark. He doesn't remember it being this dark. He doesn't remember it being this scary. He doesn't remember the fear of being home being so drowning and debilitating. Izuku grabs his bottle of quirk suppressant pills and swallows one. He tells himself it's because he has to, not because he likes the way they make him feel.